Thanks for your indulgence. We'll start the meeting at 5:33. Madam City Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Yes, ma'am. Mayor Kelly Krebs.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Robert Parkhurst.
Present.
Councilmember Edward Garcia.
Here.
Councilmember Jean Goss.
Here.
And Councilmember Christine Lowe.
Present.
Madam Mayor, we have a quorum.
Great. If we could all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I have the honor of our inspiration tonight, and just a quick one. This is our last meeting in March, so in honor of March as Women's History Month, I wanted to remind our long-term residents and probably inform lots of our newer residents that our own Marilyn Diaz was the first female police chief in Los Angeles County, and she was aptly appointed, got that appointment during Women's History Month in 2005. So that was a fun fact. And also, just similarly, our own Councilmember Lowe was the first female officer in San Gabriel Valley when she was promoted to captain. I'm not sure if that was during Women's History Month or not.
I don't remember either. I don't think so.
But anyway, I just wanted to call out a couple of our own Women's History Month fun facts here in the city. And also to honor the beginning of spring and last weekend's Wisteria Festival, although I guess we had perhaps a less blooming vine than we otherwise would have preferred. I just wanted to read a few stanzas from Emily Dickinson's poem, A Light Exists in Spring. A light exists in spring, not present on the year, at any other period when March is scarcely here. A color stands abroad on solitary fields that science cannot overtake, but human nature feels. It waits upon the lawn, it shows the furthest tree. Upon the furthest slope you know, it almost speaks to you. So thanks and welcome to spring, and welcome to everybody to tonight's meeting. Thank you for joining us. So we'll get on with business. Can I have a motion to approve tonight's agenda, or if anyone wants an amendment?
Move to approve. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Great. May I have a resolution for reading resolutions by title only?
I move to read ordinances and resolutions by title only.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Great. And on to our meeting minutes from the last meeting of March 12th. Madam City Clerk, were there any changes?
Madam Mayor, the city clerks did not receive any substantive changes to the meeting minutes.
Any changes from the meeting? If not, I would ask for a motion to approve.
Move to approve the minutes from the March 12th meeting.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. All right, so now for mayor and city council reports. Who would like to go first? Yes, please, Councilmember Goss.
Okay, so a few things. I'll try to make it quick. Back on the 14th, I attended the Chamber of Commerce Mixer at Row Fusion. Sadly, it was very poorly attended, largely I think because that was the day of the windstorm and power outages, so it was lucky we had any kind of attendance. But thanks to the Chamber for putting it together. And again, I attended the Wisteria Festival, as did the mayor, and the weather was amazing. I got to hang out with transportation subcommittee members, of which I'm a member, and some of the other folks with our public safety here in town. And gosh, the car show was just amazing again. Loved it. The Volkswagen Beetles that were on display, just my kind of favorite. On March 21st, I attended, and I just wanted to say kudos to the Chamber again and to the city staff for putting on just another memorable Wisteria Festival. I attended the San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments, or COG, meeting in Monrovia on the 21st. The agenda was extremely light. I'm not sure why we had the meeting. And so I have nothing significant to report. And last night I attended the Library Board of Trustees meeting. Not much to report except that former Planning Commissioner Peggy Dallas provided some ideas for slight improvements in the design of the library project that is underway. Those ideas were taken under advisement by the board and the city librarian. That is my report, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Who would like to go next?
I'll go next.
Sure, thank you, Councilmember Lowe.
Thank you.
On March 13th, I went to the Burroughs Canyon shooting range with Chief Barrientos, and it was their qualifying event for their shooting qualifications. It also happened to be the time when they invited all of the previous retired law enforcement officers that have served the city of Sierra Madre to do their annual qualifications, and it was really neat to see a lot of our past law enforcement officers and our current ones all working together, and I really learned a lot, especially about our non-lethal armaments, and also what we would use when and why they use certain weapons at certain times. So it was extremely interesting. I learned a lot. And then on March 21st, last week, was the Planning Commission meeting. Their sole focus was TUPs after our advisement to have them work on it. And they also experienced some of the issues that we did, where it was kind of hard to focus and figure out like how to address such a broad issue. So they decided to form a TUP subcommittee. They're really looking for a lot of feedback from the public. So please, please, please give your feedback on temporary use permits in the city of Sierra Madre. You can email jwolf@sierramadreca.gov, and that's also on the city website. And their main focus is going to be looking at small events versus house parties and how do they address those exemptions. Determining commercial uses versus non-commercial, what's commercial, what's not commercial. Enhancing the standards for frequency and duration of parties. They want to look at the standards for noise and lighting and parking. They're also going to look at modifying when an event monitor is needed, when and when is not. And notice to neighbors, they're going to analyze that, and they're to distinguish between sensitive properties and create special standards for them. And then they want to codify a standard for condition of approval. That was it.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Garcia?
Yeah, thank you. On March 17th, I as well attended the Wisteria Festival again. It seems like it's starting to kind of build momentum again and get more and more well attended. It's a beautiful day. I didn't go up to the Vine this year. Previous years I've worked as a docent up there, but not this year. I did hear as the day progressed and as the sun came out and it heated up, some of the blossoms were popping open from some people went up twice during that day. Kudos again to, as Councilmember Goss mentioned, to our public safety for being there in full force, the Chamber of Commerce for always putting on such a great event, and all the other volunteers that really make that event happen. It's really, I heard one of my friends here in town said her daughter thought this was actually a national holiday, the Wisteria Festival Day. So she'd come back from college and brought her friends from out of state to experience our Wisteria Festival. So that was kind of special. Last Saturday, this past Saturday, the 23rd, I attended the commemoration of the Vietnam War, soldiers coming home, the anniversary of the end of the war. It was hosted by our local Veterans of Foreign War Post, and it was also attended by the Monrovia Post, who presented the 21-gun salute. It was a kind of a sobering event, being, the age I am relative to knowing some Vietnam vets. To hear some of those speakers and the adversity that they experienced coming home was really sobering. One gentleman was talking about coming back and not having a very welcome reception, and then reflecting on going to the 4th of July parade in Washington, D.C. in 1991 and still expecting a poor reception. There was a group of them, he said it was our 4th of July and I wanted to be there. But they had kind of had their heads hung down low. But really, that was the one event where, from that point forward, he saw individuals standing up and applauding them, and it was kind of special. It took that long to finally get the respect that they deserve. So let's never forget that you can hate the war, but let's not hate the soldiers that fight that war for our country. I did. Representative Judy Chu was there. I was not there in time to see her speak, but I did arrive shortly thereafter. But it was nice to have our representative out of Washington in town to to speak on veterans and veteran issues. And then finally, yesterday, March 25th, I met with Helen Chan Hill. I think she's the director of curriculum for the Pasadena Unified School District. That meeting was also attended by Tina Fredericks, our board representative. And wasn't really grievances, but I spoke on some of the issues that I'm having regarding kind of the marketing of the high schools to our middle school families and or students. I feel as though, and it might be anecdotally, but I think it's not. We're going to see the data. A lot more of the Sierra Madre middle school residents, and I would say even more so the Sierra Madre resident middle school students are not going to one of the public high schools. So I know that there's a lot that can be taken from those schools. You can get a private school or better education from these high schools with their APs and their academies. So I was encouraging them to kind of do a better job and look out for the Sierra Madre residents. And you know, it's kind of outside the scope of what I do, but as a representative of Sierra Madre, I wanted to make sure that they heard that we're paying attention, and maybe a little bit more attention would be paid to the city of Sierra Madre. And that concludes my report.
Great, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes. So I know it was just before the last council meeting, but I forgot to say it last time. I went on an e-bike ride with one of our transportation committee members, John Lloyd, and got an experience to try to see what e-bikes really are like. It was my first time on one, and I was really impressed. I can see why they have outsold electric cars around the world. It's very impressive in what they can do. On March 13th, I was at the Transportation Committee, and at that meeting, we discussed the outreach to people at the Wisteria Festival about the Transportation Committee and the work that's going on there. And then we also talked about having a meeting with Metro. They're going to come to present to the committee in the upcoming weeks about bringing back the bus line to Sierra Madre. Between March 14th and March 17th, I attended the Civic Well Conference. And Civic Well is a nonprofit organization that supports sustainable solutions for California cities. And I learned a whole lot about initiatives around transportation, wildfire mitigation, funding opportunities, and electrification of city operations. So it was a really interesting and exciting event, and I look forward to bringing more of that back to the council here in the upcoming weeks and months. On March 21st, it was the Clean Power Alliance Board of Directors meeting. Nothing really to report from that. I stopped by the Vietnam commemoration very briefly. It was well attended. I was really impressed on that, the number of people that were there. It was also significant. I mean, it started at 11 and it was still going well past noon. Yeah, it's almost to 1 o'clock. Okay, so yeah, I think it was, you know, really it was really well done. It was glad to see a lot of people at that event. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get there at the beginning or stay. And then going on right now is the Chamber of Commerce meeting, so I will report back on the details of that. The next meeting, they were wrapping up the plans for the Wisteria Festival. You may have it on yours, but they've got the date. Do you have the date for the next Wisteria Festival?
Next year's?
Yes.
No, I do not.
Well, then I'll share it. April 6th is going to be the date of the 2025 Wisteria Festival. They just announced that just a few minutes ago.
That in my calendar.
Yeah, exactly. And that is all I have to report.
Great, thank you. I will just add that, as mentioned by a couple of our previous reports, I did attend the Wisteria Festival. I was in charge of judging the car show, so I was happy to provide those awards. The best in show was a beautiful Packard that was appropriately purple for the Wisteria Festival. And then, unbeknownst to me, I think the second place award winner was an actual local resident, so that was exciting. I just liked his car. I didn't know it was someone local, but that was fun. So that was a great day. As mentioned before, the weather was amazing, and there just seemed to be a lot of people. And from talking to people in the booths, it seemed like they felt like, maybe 90%-ish if, the folks there were from out of town. So it was a really great showcasing of our town to folks who, maybe have visited for the first time. So I was really excited for the effort that was put in by the entire town, particularly the chamber, our public safety staff that always keeps those events safe, and all of the volunteers that do all of the hard work, and all of the people who came out to show their wares and represent our various volunteer organizations. It was just a really great day. This past Wednesday, I attended the Natural Resource Commission meeting. They had picked up some discussion they've had previously around REACH codes, particularly electrification. Many of you may know that efforts around that have been stymied a bit by a case out of Northern California, but there have been some cities who've been creative in trying to push electrification, in ways that will still meet the criteria set in that case. So our Natural Resources Commission is talking about that. They also started talking about the plans for our upcoming Earth Day later in April. So that was a good meeting as well. So that is my report, and then I have a couple of announcements. This Thursday, the library is hosting a sensory play event. It is a sensory-friendly play designed for neurodivergent children from birth to age 11. But you do need to register in advance, so please visit the Eventbrite site and look for sensory play tickets. I assume also that there's a link on the library page on the website. So we have a couple of weather-affected events this weekend. Unfortunately, we had to cancel the composting event that was supposed to take place this Saturday, March 30th. I don't think anyone wants piles of compost out in the rain. So we will reschedule that, and we will announce that once it's being rescheduled. And hot off the presses, unfortunately, the egg hunt on Saturday also has been modified for the weather. They will still have a special guest arrive, but they will be handing out candy at the Hart Park House at 10 instead of doing the egg hunt in the park. So there still will be activities. They'll still have their photo booth and other activities, but they're going to move the candy part of the event to the indoors, again, not wanting to melt all the candy in the rain. As we've mentioned many times, we are looking to fill 3 commissioner vacancies this term, 2 on the Senior Community Commission and 1 on the Planning Commission. Those terms begin on July 1st, so we definitely need your application so that we can make those appointments in time for the new term. On April 13th, we have our 2nd annual community bike ride, which I think will very much involve e-bikes, and wellness fair, and the community service department is available for more if you have questions or need more information. And then, as mentioned before, our Earth Day will be on April 27th from 10 to 2 in Memorial Park, and we will have booths and festivities similar to prior years. And those are my announcements. Okay, so quickly on the public participation code of conduct, as we've mentioned many times, your participation is welcome and invited, but we request that you refrain from making personal, slanderous, profane, or disruptive remarks. Anyone who continues to disrupt the meeting after being warned may be asked to leave, and we ask that no signs, posters, or other large objects are brought into the chambers that would disturb or impede the meeting. On that note, I will welcome any public comment for items not on the agenda. As a reminder, please state your name and your address, and you have 3 minutes for your comments. This is for items not on the agenda.
Madam Mayor, the city clerk's office received 1 email which was forwarded to the city council and uploaded onto the city's website for items not on the agenda. And we do also have 1 speaker card from the city's librarian, Layla Regan.
Hello, Mayor Krebs, Mayor Pro Tem Parkhurst, and our wonderful City Council. I'm here to talk to you about our Writers' Workshop that is coming up in April. It will be every Tuesday in April, so starting next week at the Hart Park House at 6 p.m. We will have a different writer featured each week, and it starts with, I have the list, I promise. It starts with Naomi Hirahara. She is a Edgar Award-winning author of multiple traditional mystery series and noir short stories. So we will have her there April 2nd. April 9th is going to be Ira Baumgardner. He is an author and a self-publisher. April 16th is going to be Scott Akamoto. April 23rd is going to be Gayla Turner, and April 30th we will have Kyra Horton. So we have some wonderful authors lined up, and it'll be just every Tuesday at the Hart Park House at 6 p.m.
And can
all
you
of April.
Give a little detail on what the workshop entails so folks know what to expect.
So our wonderful workshop is going to be the authors presenting on their books, their writing journey, and then they will have an open forum to be able to have the public ask questions about their books, their writing experience. We did this last year, and thankfully library trustee Diane Sands has set this up. This is her second time doing it. She did a wonderful job. And the authors are all very different backgrounds, very different types of storytelling and unique. Some are fiction, some are nonfiction. We even have poetry in there this year. And so it's a wonderful way to, if you're thinking about writing, if you're curious about writing, if you, maybe one of them is even a self-published, so we have some publishing information that'll be there as well. So it's just a wonderful community event for all of our very talented people in this town.
Great. Thank you so much, and thanks to Commissioner Sands for her efforts.
Madam Mayor, at this time, it does not appear that we have any additional cards, speaker cards.
Is it items on the agenda or items not on the agenda? Oh. Then we'll. Oh, okay, yeah, if it's for the item on the agenda, then we'll take public comment at that time. Thank you. I should have had Librarian Regan maybe stay up here because our next item is a presentation of a proclamation to celebrate National Library Week. So this upcoming week, I guess week after next, the 7th through the 13th is National Library Week, and that is an annual celebration highlighting the valuable role that libraries, librarians, and library workers play in transforming lives and strengthening our communities and helping budding writers, as we just heard. The American Library Association's 2024 theme is Ready, Set, Library. At the Sierra Madre Public Library, no matter what our location, we will always offer a place for the community to read, discover, and connect, whether through programming, online and in-person services, or providing a roof during the rain, which we've seen we need, and maybe the wind as well. Celebrate with the library all week long with special programs like the selfie booth, where you can snap a selfie with local library resident Gandalf. So I would like to present, and I'll come up and give it to you.
Is he still guarding the safe there? Okay, good.
This is a proclamation in recognition of National Library Week, whereas libraries have long served as trusted institutions striving to ensure equitable access to information and services for all members of the community regardless of race, ethnicity, creed, ability, sexual orientation, gender identity, or socioeconomic status. Whereas libraries adapt to the ever-changing needs of their community, developing and expanding collections, programs, and services that are as diverse as the populations they serve. Whereas libraries are accessible and inclusive places that promote a sense of local connection, advancing understanding, civic engagement, and shared community goals. Where libraries are treasured institutions that preserve our collective heritage and knowledge, safeguarding both physical and digital resources for present and future generations. Whereas libraries are an essential public good and fundamental institutions in democratic societies, working to improve society, protect the right to education and literacy, and promote the free exchange of information and ideas for all. Where libraries, librarians, and library workers are joining library supporters and advocates across the nation to celebrate National Library Week. Therefore, be it proclaimed by the Sierra Madre City Council that the week of April 7th through the 13th, 2024 is National Library Week in the city of Sierra Madre. All residents are encouraged to visit our library this week to take advantage of our wonderful resources and to thank our librarians, library workers, and volunteers for making information, I'm going to add, and programming accessible to all who walk through the library's doors. Presented this 26th day of March 2024, Mayor Kelly Krebs, Mayor Pro Tem Robert Parkhurst, Council Members Edward Garcia, Jean Goss, and Christine Lowe. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have much to add. Thank you so much for doing this again for us this year. Ready, Set, Library is an interesting theme, but it kind of goes along with how the library has been here and there and everywhere. So thank you so much.
Thank you. You are also next on the agenda. It's a triple header tonight to give an update on our meaningful improvement project at the library.
So hello again, Mayor Krebs, Mayor Pro Tem Parkhurst, and our wonderful City Council. The main thing I wanted to discuss was the TSK Architects presentation that happened March 19th here in the City Council chambers. I didn't get a full printout, but I am happy to email this out to you. It is the presentation that was presented by TSK Architect. Also in attendance was Director of Public Works Arnulfo Yanez, myself, and Vertex Engineering. So we had a full house, and we saw a great representation from the public regarding our Friends of the Library, Library Board of Trustees, Library Foundation. We had about 40 people. There was a lot of commentary, a lot of interesting dialogue. Some of the main things that came up were that construction is set to start at the end of summer. So we've got a little bit more time, and I think that Vertex Engineering is already vetting and looking and compiling vendors and instructions. So they are on it. They reassured all of us that night. And the other topic of the evening was the fundraising efforts for the furniture, fixtures, and equipment. To clarify, we have our Friends of the Library, which I like to, they focus more on operations, so they're what's keeping the library going. They cover our programming, they cover our other additional projects, some things here and there. But our Library Foundation does our more bigger capital improvement projects. So they're really going to be handling the bulk of the furniture, fixtures, and equipment. That is their main fundraising goal for the library for this year. And the Friends of the Library have donated $400,000 from the Mary Tumulty Fund, $150 from the Partners Fund, and $145 from their general fund. So they are still giving us quite a bit, but the Library Foundation is going to be doing a lot of the legwork to make sure that we have a great building and everything inside of it as well. The other focus was, while improved green space was part of the 10 million targeted grant, there is going to be mostly just updating the courtyard. We will be losing our side pathway. There is just no good way to make that ADA compliant that is reasonably affordable. So we will have our south entrance, so you hopefully won't need to go up and around to get to the front anymore. You will have a way to enter from the south and the north. So we will have two entrances, and the south entrance will have a stairwell or a staircase and an elevator. So there will definitely not be any ADA issues, but we will be losing that side path and that side garden. They will be updating the courtyard and making that more ADA, because there are some ADA issues with the courtyard as it is. And outside of that, most of the funding is funneled into the building itself. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Arnulfo, Director of Public Works Arnulfo Yanez, could not be here tonight, but he did say that there will be a construction timeline update at the next City Council meeting. So if you have any questions about the presentation, I'm happy to answer.
Anybody have questions?
Just a quick one regarding
Please.
The side walkway. Are you describing the small walkway on the west side?
Yes.
Because from what I saw, there was going to be an entrance, and I think in the maybe not for patrons, but possibly for the Friends.
So the Friends will have, I know this is a terrible drawing, it's very small. There will only be a side entrance for the Friends bookstore.
Okay.
There will no longer be a pass-through path all the way up and around.
Understand. And then so on the east side, where we now have a driveway, that the updated library will kind of sit across the whole property?
So we will still have the Sierra Madre Boulevard entrance driveway, but it will become a one-way, and Mariposa Boulevard will become a two-way, and we will be moving the driveway that now shares kind of an entrance with the apartment complex. We will be moving that over so that we will have our own enter and exit, and the current vacant lot will be turned into a parking lot. So that-
Are we contemplating a walkway on that side up to the front,
I
or?
believe they are, but I think they also were running into some issues with the grading and providing proper ADA, but I'm not 100% sure if that's been resolved. I know that they did add an additional handicap parking in the south lot, and then they will be keeping the 2 handicap parking that is at the very front north end by Sierra Madre Boulevard.
Thank you, and I'm sorry for not attending on Tuesday, and I could have asked those questions at that time, but thank you for being our proxy.
Oh, you're very welcome. Any additional
else?
questions?
I
Mayor
do.
Pro Tem?
And I also apologize for not attending Tuesday. And I don't know why this has escaped my mind until now. Is the library going to be all electric? Do we know are we going to have any gas hookups to it, any boiler or anything like that?
I don't believe we are going to have any gas, but I'm not 100% sure. I know that right now they are looking at the electrical plan. That's the phase that they are in.
Perfect.
So if Director Yanez was here, I'm sure he could answer that perfectly, but from what I understand, it will be mostly electric. I think we're trying to go as green as possible, according to California code.
Okay. All right. If we could at the next meeting, and I'll actually also reach out to Director Yanez, if I'd like to, if at all possible, I'd like it to be all electric. So, thank you very much. Thank you for the hard work on it. Really appreciate it.
Anybody else? Thank you so much. Appreciate the update and for all of your participation tonight.
Thank you.
That concludes our library portion of the meeting. And we will move on to our agenda for the evening, our action items. Madam City Clerk, would you mind giving the report for the consent calendar?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't mind at all. This evening for the City Council's consideration are 3 separate items on the consent calendar. The first of 3 is consideration of Resolution 24-21, approving certain demands. And the recommendation from City staff is that the City Council approve this resolution, approving payment of city warrants. Consent item B is the consideration of a professional services agreement for structural engineering plan check services. And staff recommends that the City Council enter into a 2-year professional services agreement with Hong Tam for structural engineering. And the last of the 3 is the second reading of Ordinance 1469, and that's adding Chapter 8.40 Landscaping Equipment to Title 8 Health and Safety of the Sierra Madre Municipal Code. The recommendation from City staff is that the City Council read by title only and adopt Ordinance 1469 this evening. Madam Mayor, that concludes my report.
Thank you so much. Do we have any questions from the council on any of the consent items?
Madam Mayor?
Please.
On item B, so Hong Tam has been with us for 30 years. I'm just wondering if we have a succession plan for him, because I would imagine that he may be thinking about retirement before too long. And so if we don't have one, I would like us to try to have one. I mean, 30 years, he's got a lot of institutional knowledge. It would be good to figure out who would be following in his footsteps, and as part of that, starting to get them trained so that they don't come in cold for us.
Any other questions on any of the consent items? Okay, I will entertain public comment for any of our items on the consent, which would be the warrants, the professional services agreement, and the second reading of the landscaping equipment ordinance.
Madam Mayor, we do not have any speaker cards for this item.
Great, I'll bring it back to council for any discussion. Oh, sure, please.
Steve Rosker, 65 Olive. Good evening. I did want to, like Parkhurst, talk about line item B, about the engineering. I've been a building contractor, state licensed general contractor since the mid-'80s. I was living in Sierra Madre. At the same time, Hong Tam was hired here. And I've worked under his auspice on projects in Sierra Madre that I've done many a time, and I've worked with him on projects that I've built outside of the town. And he is by far the best engineer I have ever come across, and there, bar none. There's the respect he gathers in other communities throughout the San Gabriel Valley is indescribable. The city is very fortunate to have had him for pushing 40 years, and I recommend that you give him every dollar you can. He's worth keeping around. And I know he still has a couple more years in him, but I think it is, but you should talk to him about who he thinks would be a good fit to come back, okay? I do have a comment about the TUPs, but should I go on
Yes,
to that?
please come back on that time.
No.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments. If nothing further from the council, I would entertain a motion to approve our consent items.
I move to approve the consent calendar as presented.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, so now we have one public hearing regarding Resolution 24-17 to adopt updated vehicle miles travel thresholds for the purpose of analyzing transportation impact under CEQA. I think Senior Planner Lynn is going to present.
Good evening, Mayor Creeps and members of the council. The public hearing item before you this evening is for your consideration to adopt an updated San Gabriel Valley Council of Government Regional Model Vehicle Mile Travel Baseline and the threshold to analyze the transportation impact under the California Environmental Quality Act. Tonight, we are privileged to have the technical expert Dalia Vush, an engineer from Fears and Peers, representing the San Gabriel Valley Council of Government. Dalia will be presenting crucial information regarding the state law and also the rationale behind the update and the recommendation from the San Gabriel Valley COG regarding the updated thresholds. Without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Delia, who will guide us through the presentation.
Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you so much for your time. Just want to start off by saying this is not going to be as much fun as libraries, but I'll try to keep it brief and light and open to any and all questions as we go along. So as Planner Lynn mentioned, we're here to talk about vehicle miles traveled. These recommendations are coming from the San Gabriel Valley COG. We've been brought on to actually refresh a set of tools that the COG had previously created to assist the member cities in simplifying and streamlining the approach to VMT. I'm going to use those words a lot because I think a lot of what this has to do with is making things as simple and direct as possible for you as a city as you're reviewing development projects. So we're going to discuss why we're here, why we're making some updates, and the recommended threshold change here. So just a quick update on Senate Bill 743. This was a state law that went into effect in 2020. There were 3 goals associated with this change in legislation. The first was to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, the second was to encourage infill development, and the third was to promote public health through active transportation. So that's walking, biking, transit. So the big change here is that level of service, or LOS, is no longer the CEQA metric for evaluating transportation impacts. It is now vehicle miles traveled. LOS can still be studied as part of the development review process, but it is no longer part of CEQA. So the City of Sierra Madre previously adopted VMT thresholds in accordance with state law, so everything's fully compliant in accordance with state law on that front. And the COG had previously helped develop guidelines, tools, and threshold recommendations to assist in that transition. Part of the process included screening criteria. So the state, the Office of Planning and Research, did identify ways that projects could be screened or to presume a less than significant impact under VMT. So there's a lot of criteria on this screen. I think the long story short is that the City of Sierra Madre has adopted these consistent with state guidance. And what this allows is projects that meet these criteria, small projects, projects close to transit, projects in VMT efficient areas, do not need to complete a full VMT analysis and can have a simplified VMT approach that simplifies the CEQA process, tends to make it so there's less CEQA documentation needed, which can again move things forward in a faster, more simpler way when it comes to CEQA. So as I mentioned, the COG had previously developed a tool and guidelines to assist member cities. That tool is available online for anyone to use. It identifies VMT impacts and mitigation measures, and the COG is currently undertaking an update of this tool. The reason behind this is that the regional MPO, the Southern California Area of Governments, or SCAG, has updated their regional travel model. This happens every 4 years, regular update. But as a result of that update, the underlying data that we use to evaluate VMT has changed. So as such, the COG is updating all of their tools and taking the opportunity to look at refreshing thresholds and guidelines, which is what we're talking about today, is updating the city's VMT thresholds to respond to the change in the model and the data. So currently, the city has a threshold based on the Northwest San Gabriel Valley sub-area. Taking a look at how the data has changed and shifted with this new model, again, 4 years more current data, if you will, we're recommending that we switch over to a threshold based on the San Gabriel Valley COG region as a whole for mixed use and employment-based projects, and the City of Sierra Madre boundary for residential projects. The reason we're recommending this as part of this effort with the COG is to go back to that slide about screening criteria. The more projects that can be screened, the simpler and more streamlined the CEQA process becomes. So by adopting this threshold, we're basically maximizing the number of projects that can presume a less than significant VMT impact. And there's a map here that just kind of illustrates that a little bit visually. On the left is the current threshold that's been adopted by City Council resolution. All the areas that are yellow and blue, if a project came forward today, they could screen as VMT. On the right is the recommended updated threshold. All the areas in yellow and blue, if a project came forward today, could screen under those areas. And again, they would still need to go through the development review process, look at everything that you would always look at. This would just be applied to the CEQA side of things for transportation impacts. So again, a bit technical, tried to keep it high level but informative and brief. For right now, we're here to today discuss approving the updated thresholds. From here, the COG is going to update the tool with all the new data and any updated thresholds across all the member cities. Then they'll be providing updated traffic impact study guidelines to each of the member cities, and finally releasing a public version of the tool later in spring. So with that, I'll be open to any and all questions.
I will open it up for council questions first. Anybody have any questions? Either of our presenter or, and I should say, planning manager, Lynn?
Madam Mayor?
Please.
So could you bring up the slides again? And I'm not sure I followed the current to recommended.
Yeah.
What is that? I don't understand what the change is there. What is being changed from the current to recommended?
So what's being changed is the threshold that's used to determine a significant impact under CEQA when it comes to transportation. And so if you look at the map, these are the areas in the travel model in the city of Sierra Madre. So all of the squares and shapes, we call those traffic analysis zones. So if the color is yellow or blue, it's below the threshold. And if it's below the threshold, you can assume it's going to have a less than significant transportation impact, and you don't need to do a full VMT analysis. If you can screen a project, it's a very straightforward, simple, 1 to 2 week exercise. If you have to do a full VMT assessment, that's a 2 to 3 month study with a lot more cost and detailed engineering work that has to be done. So if you can maximize the amount of area in your city that can have projects screen out, you can simplify the transportation analysis that needs to be done by individual development projects for CEQA.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah, go ahead.
So when you say current, that means on the basis of our current codes with the thresholds based on the 2016. So the recommended would be the change that would be made based on the changing of our thresholds, also implementing the new updated model information.
Almost. The current is your current threshold with the new model data.
Okay.
So if you were to keep your current threshold, which is absolutely an option that's available to you, you do not need to update your threshold. You are in compliance with state law currently. If you were to keep your current threshold, the map on the left is the new model data that would apply moving forward. And the map on the right is if you were to update your threshold, what would apply moving forward.
And I know this wasn't part of the visual part of the slide, so I hesitate to ask, but do we have a sense of what the current state of play is under the current model? I mean, just so we can get a sense of like what we've kind of been living with.
It's actually quite similar to the recommended, which I think is
Okay.
part of why we're making the recommendations we are, is, you know, the model data changed, which if we had had this model data the first time that thresholds were adopted back a handful of years ago, probably would have recommended this other threshold then, right? So
see.
that's part of the reason that this is being brought to
So,
you.
It sounds like this is a bureaucratic thing, more than anything. So, you know, the idea on the VMT is to get people out of their cars and get them into, you know, human-powered transportation, like e-bikes. So, how does this help us do that?
Yeah, so I think that a couple things to keep in mind. So absolutely, that is part of the big intent of the move to SB 743, is to promote active transportation, promote infill development, reduce greenhouse gases, and a great way to do that is to get people out of a single occupancy vehicle. So if a project is coming through that's going to have a major impact on transportation in the city, whether it is in a zone that's yellow, blue, or red, you as the city staff, the city council, it is totally within your purview to request a full VMT assessment, even if it meets screening criteria. What this gives you is maximum flexibility to simplify the development review process, especially for smaller projects where there's not going to be a huge impact on traffic. This makes it so there's not a huge onus put on smaller projects that may have, in a previous LOS world, not have generated impacts. Under VMT, even very small projects can generate an impact, and they don't necessarily have a ton of ability to do that wide-scale mitigation that's really necessary to get those folks out of their cars, right? So the intent here is, again, to provide a lot of flexibility in the process so that you have screening criteria and thresholds that give you the most tools, most levers to pull, if you will.
So so what you're saying is if we have a higher than regional average threshold, it's going to be harder for us to implement things like protected bike lanes or, closing down streets if we ever wanted to do that, or that's going to be more difficult if we have a higher than regional average?
Not necessarily. I think regardless of what your threshold is, you'd have the ability to implement those sorts of mitigation measures when projects have VMT impacts. I will say most projects are not going to have VMT impacts at the scale that they would require that level of mitigation.
So again, this is just a bureaucratic exercise.
I would say it is an exercise.
Okay, I have a couple other questions. We're using data from 2012. That's what I read. It said, and I'll just quote for a second, the SCAG 2016 RTP/SCS is based on traffic counts collected in 2012, the 2012 roadway network, the 2012 transit network, and ridership information, land use information, and other socioeconomic inputs. The 2020 RTP/SCS is based on the same data points collected in 2016. So again, I'm not entirely clear. We're talking about, so everything's based on traffic counts, roadway network, and transit network in 2012, 12 years ago?
That's the previous version of the SCAG model. That's correct. So the regional travel models are always on a bit of a delay. So they get updated every 4 years, and when they're updated, they're based on the previous regional transportation plan. which is based on the previous 4 years baseline. So it does, the
So
timing.
Is there any plan to, I mean, that seems to me like 12 years, a lot has happened in 12 years, especially in this city. I mean, is this helpful? Because we've had lots of housing changes and lots of development, not lots of development, we've had development over that time period. It seems to me that it's hard to see how you could draw any route information or travel information for data that is so far out of date.
Well, to be clear, the new updated model is based on 2016.
Yes.
So I mean, which is not to say that's not also outdated, but the new model that we're talking about does not go back to 2012.
That's correct.
So there were traffic counts that were collected in 2016 for the model.
So there's traffic counts, socioeconomic data, a whole host of inputs that go into a regional travel model. It takes so many years to collect and calibrate and refine that information.
Right.
That's kind of why it's on that 4-year delay. And that is not unique to Sierra Madre, San Gabriel Valley, or the Southern California region. That is a industry-wide reality of our regional travel models, which I will agree with you wholeheartedly. They are imperfect tools, but they are the best tools we have available to do this type of work.
Because the way, I understand what you're saying. That's not the way I read that paragraph that I pulled out. And so they did actually collect traffic counts and other things to try to update the model.
Absolutely, that's part of the model update process.
Okay.
So, I mean, just to follow up on that, I mean, because my takeaway from that was that we're going to see major changes in this, because as we get into data from 2020, that's going to be very anomalous given what was going on in 2020. And so I don't, this is not exactly in the purview, but I'm sort of thinking about how this is going to play out.
Yeah.
I mean, there's going to have to be something different done in the next cycle, because that's not going to be representative data, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not in SCAG's Department of Model Development, but absolutely you're correct. They're not going to take, March 2020 and use that as the basis for the next model update. I'm sure they'll be looking at 2021, 2022. But that will be the next iteration of the model. And I do just want to add, part of the effort that the COG is taking in this is they're trying to build a little bit more, I want to say, resiliency, if you will, into the thresholds and guidelines this time, so that we don't have to come back to council every 4 years to do this update, that we can say we're going to stick with the most current data and the most current versions moving forward. Because, as I said, this is routine. The model does get updated every 4 years.
I mean, because we would expect the current state in 2024 to be quite different, not just because of the normal passage of time, but I mean, just work patterns.
Absolutely.
Everything has, had a paradigm shift. And so we would expect the next thing to maybe even be a different, a different world, I mean, in some ways.
Absolutely.
Okay. I'm sorry, you had another question?
It's no problem. So, and this may be for Analyst Carlson. So one of the things that was mentioned in here was the objective L52.7 from our general plan, which is to create and implement the city's bikeway plan. That's one of the things that's in our plan. So, Analyst Carlson, can you give us an update of where we are in our city's bikeway plan?
Sure, thank you, Pro Tem Parkhurst. We have not made any significant solid progress on it. I do know that it is a hot topic for our Transportation Ad Hoc Subcommittee, with the idea that once we could potentially get a bus line back and we could potentially drastically improve our local transportation program, this would be something that I understand is a big interest of the subcommittee.
Great. Thank you for that update. Appreciate it. I'm done.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions?
Just want to understand the
Councilmember.
discussion is around CEQA issues, right?
Correct. This is a CEQA threshold.
Yeah,
Correct.
that was my understanding. I wasn't sure I was following your question. So, within the scope of CEQA. So
Yeah.
I just want to understand why the questions for the purposes, because it didn't sound like it was inside the scope of CEQA for other issues. Or that's fine if it was.
No, I get, no, that makes sense. I'm just trying to understand, yeah, because a street project would not be within the scope of CEQA.
That's
right.
right,
There's
yeah,
gonna be
yeah.
development in other
Yeah,
places.
yeah.
Thank you for that clarification.
No, I
That
just.
actually helps.
'Cause
and
I have a lot of questions too regarding like how the data is taken and considering, especially considering, you know, the per capita model. Because if you think about a town like Sierra Madre that doesn't have a lot of commercial.
Absolutely.
You would think, it would make sense that our per capita model would be higher than regional because we have to do lots of trips. And maybe we're very efficient with our trips and doing it all in one trip, but if it keeps going back to our home, obviously we're gonna be much larger than the region. But, no, I just wanna make sure I understand. I'm just trying to say, I thought I was misunderstanding the reason for this presentation and the discussion. But if it's kind of squarely around CEQA, and looking at EIRs regarding future development, I think I better understand. But, no, I'm with you. This stuff is very interesting, but I wanted to make sure I understand our charge tonight.
It's a good point.
Thank you. All right, if no more questions, I will open it up for public comment.
Madam Mayor, I do not have any speaker cards for this item, for this public hearing.
Great, then I will bring it back to council for discussion. Anybody have thoughts they'd like to share?
I don't know what kinds of options we have here. I think we're gonna basically approve it because it is a bureaucratic exercise, so, right?
I mean, I think this was the slide that I took away as, if we didn't approve the recommended threshold, this is sort of where we would be under the new model. And if we do undertake the recommended modifications to what we have currently as our thresholds, this would be where we would land. And based on the presentation, this is closer to what we're living with now.
And that's specific to the employee model.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, I was-
but no, I
think
agree.
they're all-
I think they all get better.
They all get
Yeah.
better.
They all get better.
And that, I think at the end of the day, could potentially save us money for not having to do full-on, full-on vehicle miles traveled analyses. I think the presenter said there was a couple different levels, and the higher level is obviously more expensive. It takes months and months and months to perform.
When that allows us to then invest that same type of money in actual transportation
Yes.
improvements.
Yes.
So I know it's a little bit tangential because the CEQA is going to be more off the road than on the road. I mean, this is dealing really with density and trying to get more density within cities. I think that's the idea of my understanding of SB 743. So that's at some level tangential to the desire to try to get better mobility in the city.
Yeah, understood.
Yeah, I like the notion that fewer people will be automatically required to do the more onerous CEQA analyses because as we know, we don't have a ton of large or even medium scale development in this town. And so the idea that we can decide as a council which of those projects we think warrant that level of scrutiny gives us, I think, a level of flexibility that we don't really have in much of our development analyses. So I like not accidentally forcing on some small project the requirement that this be done, and trying to limit that, but still maintaining the ability for us to decide that there are projects that warrant it, even if it's technically screened out.
Mm-hmm.
I also appreciate that when we're looking at the map, it's not lessening the need for studies in the areas where we have current large projects or larger projects for our city going on, and the transportation analysis has to stay that regiment versus lower down where we aren't seeing those larger projects in the lower section of Sierra Madre, in the south section.
I'd like to move that we adopt Resolution 24-17.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes. Okay, we have 3 items up for discussion tonight. I'm wondering if Senior Planner Wolf is here. I'm wondering if we actually might push the discussion of home occupancy permits first, because I think we have some members of the public that are here to comment. Would that be okay?
One's fee waiver, I think, one's
Yeah, I know. We'll come back if you don't mind.
two.
If you don't mind, thank you. So we will move to discussion number 3. Use is permissible for a property located in R1 single-family home zones, and this is with respect to home occupancy permits.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Mayor and City Council, Mayor Pro Tem Parkhurst, and also thank you, Councilmember Lowe, for the announcement, and thank you again for moving my item up for the second time in a row. I'm here tonight and happy to reopen that discussion for uses permissible in the one-family R1 zone. This time, the focus is on home occupations. So just again, before I start this discussion, I'd like to mention that staff is welcoming public participation, and we are encouraging it. The agenda report can be digitally accessed by scanning the QR code on the left, and the presentation, if you'd like to follow along tonight, can be accessed by scanning the QR code on the right. If anyone would like me to come back to this, please let me know. So just to refresh from last time, a home occupation permit allows ongoing repetitive business or professional uses, activity or utilization on residentially zoned or improved property as a use incidental and accessory to a primary residential use. Home occupation can be permitted if the business does not generate any pedestrian or vehicular traffic above that which is normal or reasonable for the district in which the home occupation is located. It can be permitted if the business does not change the appearance of any structure. It can be permitted if the home occupation does not occupy any part of the garage, but there are exceptions to that. If the business does not place any signage identifying the business. And finally, it can be permitted if the business does not generate any potential nuisance detrimental to the surrounding neighborhood. So this is in contrast to a temporary use permit, which allows a use for a limited duration and frequency. And as I mentioned, a home occupation is ongoing and continuous. So home occupation, there are 2 types that can be permitted. The first is permitted by right, not inherently allowed, but something that someone still needs to come in to get a permit for, where it's conducted entirely within an enclosed structure and occupies at most 50% of the floor area of the residence. A city can exercise discretion on a permit if that activity is proposed outside an enclosed structure or occupies more than 50% of the floor area of the residence. Some examples of home occupations, first permitted by right, include traditional home offices, songwriting and digital music production, short-term rentals, art production and shipment, bakery, which is a micro kitchen, and telehealth. Some that have been permitted with discretion include private art lessons for flower arrangement, counseling services, and legal services. So part of the nature of home occupation might include a small event, and now I use this term unofficially, but this is just for the purpose of this presentation. A small event can be something that is activated through the home occupation. An example, for a workshop, that can be an art class which occasionally hosts on-site classes for students, or short-term rental where there might be more guests than would it be anticipated. In this example, it's where a guest count can exceed 2 per bedroom, or any in-person service which professional service requires the in-person presence of the client. And in these cases, although it's not currently a standard, the frequency and duration can be limited by conditions placed on the approval of a discretionary home occupation or is codified through law adopted on an ordinance. And just to clarify, on a discretionary home occupation where conditions are placed, it's currently, the process is currently a case-by-case basis. So if staff determine that there would be some kind of activation of an event, standards for frequency can be placed as part of conditions.
Can I just ask that those conditions would be placed as part of the process? That would be at the staff level, or would that be at a planning commission, or who would determine the conditions and as part of the discretionary permit application and issuance?
Thank you for the question. I will get into it on a later slide, but just to answer your question now, on a discretionary home occupation, that is the administrative level. Staff do come up and draft the conditions, and it's ultimately decided on by the director.
Thank you.
So regarding employment of home occupation permits, by right, permits, it's not allowed to have an on-site employment of help other than by members of the residing family. But in discretion, a maximum of 1 employee working on-site who is not a permanent resident of the home business may be allowed as long as there's parking available on the site. And currently, there are no required standards of employees regarding frequency or duration. Rather, an employee even once per year would constitute on-site employment of help. And I'm also moving into the adaptive reuse of historic landmarks, just because this is tangentially related. This is permitted by the approval of a conditional use permit. It can allow for conversions of historic landmarks to bed and breakfast in a small entrepreneurial business or service or professional offices use. For the approval of that conditional use permit, there are findings traditionally for conditional use permit, but in addition to those findings, the Planning Commission would need to find that there is consistency with the general plan's objectives for historic preservation. Conversion is not detrimental to the architectural character of the landmark, and that the use is compatible with the neighborhood where it's located. What's really for determination, and this is part of the public hearing process for a conditional use permit, is what could constitute a small entrepreneurial business. And the question was asked to us what that might be considered, and just as a basis for standard, staff would determine any use permitted in the residential entrepreneurial overlay zone, which include accountants, attorneys, dentists, engineers, etc., as uses that constitute small entrepreneurial business.
Councilmember Garcia has a question.
Thank you, Planner Wolf. So this is the first time I'm hearing this, and I probably should have picked up on it before, but I want to understand the adaptive reuse is only under a CUP, a conditional use permit, and can't be used, isn't really for the purposes of a TUP, a temporary use permit. So if you want to use an adaptive reuse clause, let's say, for purposes of your business, it would have to be a CUP rather than an occasional TUP.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
And right on into the residential entrepreneur overlay zone. This applies to certain residential areas on the zoning map, and generally those are residential areas located on the Sierra Madre Boulevard and certain parts of Baldwin Avenue, Auburn Avenue, and Sunnyside Avenue. Home occupations may be permitted, residential entrepreneur overlay allows for full use of a property for the commercial office. Again, that's for accountants, attorneys, brokers, etc. Permitted only by approval of a minor conditional use permit. Now, in contrast to a conditional use permit, this one can be approved at the staff level by the director. In addition to that, signs are allowed in these residential entrepreneur overlay zone where there exists one that is approved. I've come up with this flow chart for how one could determine a commercial use might be permitted in a residential zone. First question one might ask is the property a historic landmark? If it is, then it can be permitted through the conditional use permit or home occupation process. If it isn't, then we would consider, is it in the residential entrepreneur overlay zone? If it is, then it can be converted through the minor conditional use permit or through the traditional home occupation permit. And if it is neither, then it can only be permitted through home occupation. In the decision-making hierarchy I have here, as graphically represented, the highest level of authority is in the Planning Commission and City Council level, where conditional use permits and appeals are considered. And the next level down is at the director level. This is for minor conditional use permits and discretionary home occupations. Again, this would be for conversions of dwellings in the residential overlay zone to the office, or for an outdoor home occupation. And finally, at the staff level through ministerial process is for home occupations that are fully compliant with the code. By way of example, that would be an indoor home occupation residing less than 50% the area of the home. Regarding direction for City Council and for Planning Commission to consider from City Council, there are three questions we are posing. The first is, should home occupation permits continue to be permitted for businesses activity outside a fully enclosed structure through the discretionary process? The second is, should home occupations be permitted to allow small events in residential zones? And third, given that residentially zoned historic landmarks may currently be converted to a bed and breakfast inn or small entrepreneurial business, should such conversion be interpreted to allow use of the property for small events in residential zones? I'm going to break each of these questions down so we don't need to stay and linger on this slide. So procedurally, just to break this out in thought, so the first question, should home occupations be continued to, or discretionary home occupations be continued for outdoor business? If so, should Planning Commission consider an amendment to the home occupation ordinance? If yes, the direction is understood that specific and measurable enforceable standards be implemented for the purpose of outdoor business. If not, then no action is necessary. But if discretionary home occupations, or in any case, not allow outdoor business activity, then an amendment would be required to prohibit the outdoor use in home occupations. And the second question, should home occupations be permitted to allow small events in residential zones? If not, or in either case actually, an amendment would be required to the home occupation permit ordinance. But should small events not be allowed, then that ordinance would include a prohibition on those small events, however that might be defined. But if so, then the ordinance would be amended to allow small events with measurable and enforceable operational standards. And the final question regarding the historic landmark adaptive reuse, allowing small events, should City Council find that it is necessary or convenient to allow small events by way of conditional use permit adaptive reuse? The question then is, should the historic preservation ordinance be amended? If so, further clarification would be amended for what conversions might be allowed. And if not, then no action is necessary. But if small events should not be permitted in adaptive reuse, then an amendment would be required to include exceptions from what may be converted. The alternatives for City Council tonight are to discuss the concerns of the residents and provide the Planning Commission and staff with direction, or continue the discussion and direct staff to return to a future meeting with additional information, or take any action of their preference. The City Council is being asked to hear from the community and to consider the input from the community and discuss the issues. The recommendation from staff tonight is to discuss the concerns of the residents and provide the Planning Commission and staff with direction. And again, here are the questions. We can go through them one at a time. And then also brought up in this presentation were questions to pose to Planning Commission. First is, do frequency and or duration factor into on-site employment of help for home occupation? The second is, what constitutes a small entrepreneurial business in adaptive reuse? And how does that compare to the residential entrepreneur overlay? And we also welcome any more questions the City Council might have for the Planning Commission to contemplate through their amendment review. Oh, and then one more slide, I'm sorry. For participation, for public participation, I've made a convenient link to the website. Formerly, this was sierramadreca.gov/TUP, but I've made a dedicated web page. This is now sierramadreca.gov/ www.city.gov/TUP2024. You can scan the QR code to get there immediately. And if you'd like to be included on email blasts about upcoming City Council or Planning Commission meetings, please email myself at jwolf@sierramadreca.gov. Our next anticipated meeting with the Planning Commission is on April 18th, where we anticipate to review an ordinance amendment for the temporary use permits.
Thank you very much, Senior Planner Wolf. I think our city attorney had a comment.
Thank you, Mayor. Planning staff and the city attorney's office were talking about how the conversation went the last time around, and we were thinking about how the conversation was a little unfocused, but we think it was unfocused in part because of the way we phrased the question. So when we were talking to planning staff, we thought it may be helpful to have 3 questions where planning staff is seeking yes or no answers to. And if you could provide yes or no answers to those questions, then we would have the policy direction to go to the Planning Commission and figure out, based on that policy direction, how we're going to work with this ordinance.
Thank you.
After providing the yes or no direction, if you wanted to pose additional questions to the Planning Commission, I think that would also be appropriate for their consideration.
I very much appreciate the framing of the conversation because, yes, I think we were a little all over the place, to put it mildly, in the last meeting. So I don't know how useful that ended up being, and if this is going to be more useful for direction, I think that will be great, and it also will, allow us to focus and provide the most value. So on that note, any questions before we open to public comment? So not discussion, not yes or no, just questions to that will help us discuss, after public comment.
Madam Mayor?
Please.
So I want to make sure I understand. I see a little bit of inconsistency, and maybe it's my understanding, but when we're talking about these home occupation permits, it says it can occupy at most 50% of the floor area, and I'm trying to build a nexus around short-term rentals to have an understanding of this. But then it says short-term rentals are an example, but I would think that short-term rentals would be 100% of the floor area. And then going on, it says short-term rentals when rented to a party exceeding 2 people per bedroom, so that'd be 3 people or more per bedroom. Is that part of the, well, it's all kind of around short-term rentals. I just want to make sure I understand our policy as it currently stands regarding that issue.
So with regard to short-term rentals specifically, there is no specific regulation to them. They are an extent of just regular long-term rentals to a property. So to permit the short-term rental, we ask that residents file for a home occupation permit, and this is kind of a loose interpretation to that, where we can track, who is the owner of the property at the time, and is short of having any standards or formal process, this is the solution at the moment.
Madam Mayor, I'm not trying to create discussion here, but I want to make sure that when we're getting to discussion, ask questions, that we remember that, from what I recall, the home occupation permit, which is a form of it's part of the business license, am I correct? Or is this completely different?
They are tied together. Someone who has a home occupation permit will need to maintain that through maintaining a business license. So
we were discussing previously using this as a vehicle for making sure we had recourse against bad actors and short-term rentals. So I just want to make sure, I know that's not part of our questions here, but if we're creating policy regarding that, I'm trying not to get in discussion. But
perhaps that would be a additional question?
Yeah, I think.
Okay.
I think. Because we didn't get to the point where we gave absolute direction on how we wanted to deal with this, and obviously I don't want to get into discussion. So
okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I understand the policy.
To answer the second part of your question, that was just a mild example that I've seen other cities use as a basis for standard of regulation.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No. Councilmember Lowe?
So since I'm the newer one and I wasn't here for those previous discussions, and I'm the liaison for Planning Commission, I'm trying to track how this all goes. So we have TUPs that are for temporary use, like for a party or for like the pop-up events for the native plant sale. home occupation permits versus conditional use permits. What's the difference?
So the home occupation permit would allow business at a limited level across the board. A conditional use permit can be more than that and can essentially change the use of a property. Adaptive reuse is just one way to do that, but another way is just a traditional conditional use permit that would allow for any residential property to convert itself to, for example, an open air theater or a recreation center. We don't have many examples of that, but that is possible.
Could you give me an example so I can help understand that? Do we have any examples of an R1?
Of which?
An R1 conditional use permit?
Just big picture, I want to draw a distinction is temporary use permits for temporary uses,
Yes.
4 times a year. But if you want to have a continuous use on a property that's commercial in nature, in a residential zone, there are only 3 ways to do it. Home occupancy permit,
Okay.
adaptive reuse of a historic site, because it only applies to historic sites, or the city expands its overlay to include, because there's that entrepreneurial overlay, that's what it's called. So
I got it.
or we have an entrepreneurial overlay to allow for those uses. So there's only 3 ways to have a continuous commercial use on a residential site.
Thank you, thank you.
Can I follow up on that? So it makes sense to me for having doctors, dentists, and optometrists to be part of the entrepreneurial overlay zone. That makes perfect sense. Maybe even real estate agencies. But I'm confused on some of the other things that are in there, like accountants, attorneys, therapists. I mean, is the idea with this that it is people coming to the residents? So is that why legal and counseling are permitted with discretion? Like where does the line draw on this?
I feel like I'm always co-opting Josh's presentation, so I'm going to let Josh answer that question.
I don't care who answers it.
Just as a
honestly.
reminder, these are things that we 4 of us decided on the housing element update within the general plan update. So we actually already discussed that issue in these uses
We just
under entrepreneurial overlay.
Right, so I remember discussing the entrepreneurial overlay, and I remember the discussion of like doctors and dentists and optometrists. That makes sense. And I'm trying to remember, and maybe the question is to other council members, is the trigger people coming, or is it the activity, right? Because you could be a lawyer and you could be completely remote and you could go somewhere else to meet. You could be a counselor and the counseling services, and you could have that be a telehealth essentially. We've got telehealth in there. So that's what I'm trying to wrap my brain around is maybe that was part of our decision, but I want to make sure I understand kind of the refresh on where we were with that.
And from my recall, we took 1 or 2 business uses out when we decided on that. But I think to your question, we would defer to the plan department.
Yes, thank you for your question. What I'm hearing is a little bit of confusion, maybe conflation between a discretionary home occupation and a use allowed in the residential entrepreneur overlay. In the residential entrepreneur overlay, there is a specific area in the city in which that can be permitted through a minor conditional use permit. And what it can permit is a full use of a property or a conversion of a dwelling unit to a full office, which would imply that it can draw traffic at some level, at the level that it would draw. Whereas a discretionary home occupation permit, we exercise the discretion to allow certain home offices which might draw traffic, and that discretion to approve is based on what is appropriate to the residential neighborhood.
So that's why legal services is permitted with discretion, because it may have people coming to it.
Correct.
Okay, that helps.
But no, if it's not
Okay.
more follow-up, I'd go back to Councilmember Lowe. You
Oh,
were
oh,
following,
sorry,
yeah.
that's right.
Yeah,
Right,
so
thank
did you
you.
have
My
another
apologies.
question?
No, did you have
Oh.
a follow-up?
No, I
Okay.
thought maybe you had more questions.
No, not at this point.
Okay, sorry.
Mayor Creep, I just want to respond to Councilmember Lowe's question regarding, is there any CUP on residential properties? Planning Commission also brought up that question during their meetings, and currently we do have one That's Mary's Market, it's residential canyon, and it had a CUP since 1980 something. That it's operating as a market or restaurant.
Thank you. Okay, Mayor Pro Tem, other questions?
So, what are the enforcement provisions of the ordinance? Is it part of the normal enforcement code? So if someone was to have a sign in front of their house, how would that get enforced?
We would enforce through a response through a complaint, or
Okay.
as it might be observed through, as it's obvious through a sign that's on the front of a property, we would notice that and say, hey, what's up? We would issue a warning without citation. I think we go through 2 warnings, and in that notice, we do provide corrective action. If homeowner does follow through on the corrective action, then there's no more citation.
Got it.
Please, you have a follow-up?
No, I'll wait till Councilman or Mayor Pro Tem's done. I have a couple
Yeah,
of questions.
That's all mine.
Mayor Pro Tem, just to add to that also, if they go through the home occupancy permit overlay or HOP route, it's a more powerful, we have more powerful enforcement tools in that they have to pull a business license. And if they pull a business license, we can revoke their business license as opposed to, let's say, a temporary use permit. If there's a temporary use permit and they do some activity and we don't like it, we have to use our existing code enforcement procedures. But if they pull one, they're issued one of these permits, they also have to get a business license. And if we don't like the activity, we have our code enforcement action, and we can also pull their business license.
Got it.
And then what is the enforcement? I mean, what's the ramifications of canceling the business license?
So if we took their business license away, they stop their business that moment. They cannot continue whatever their business is. So it's a hammer.
And then what's the enforcement on that?
Anything. It could be code enforcement. It could be civil injunction.
Thank you.
Mr. City Attorney preempted one of my questions.
Let me see if
No, it's great.
Councilmember Goss has any questions before we come back to you.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Talkative today. So I, kind of offline, I asked Management Analyst Carlson if he had access to our application for our home, because we're talking about HOPs right now. I don't know if he was able to pull that up, but if he is, I just wondered, because I was wondering like what kind of questions were asked currently in the thought that we might give direction to, I guess it would be to staff, not Planning Commission, to alter the questionnaire for that process. So could you describe, I guess we have it, what the questions are? Just so we can have an understanding of what the applicant is being asked at that time. Maybe if you could just kind of narrate it for the public.
So one of the common questions we ask, and we try to get as much description as possible, is the nature of the business, and that's the 3rd line you see there. We also ask for the resident square footage and the square footage used by the business, so that we can understand where that lies on terms of percentage, the number of employees who do not live on site, whether the residence is frequented by customers. A lot of times we get a lot of feedback on, what does that mean? Is it customers online? Is it customers in person? And this is intended to ask the question, is how many in-person customers would you expect? And then at what capacity are they doing so?
And do you find that most applicants understand the residential square footage to mean the dwelling unit and not the size of the property?
Yeah, generally, yes. It's something that they could probably easily look up on some public record, or just some kind of real estate record.
May I ask a question regarding that? So when you compared the other cities, we were the only city that did 50% of the dwelling area. The other ones either didn't state, or they stated an actual square footage amount. And I know, like, when you're going through your say you're filing your taxes and you have a home business, that, you can claim a certain percentage of, certain amount of square footage for that. Why would Sierra Madre be 50% of a dwelling and inconsistent with the other surrounding cities? Do we know what the validation for that was?
I couldn't tell you what the validation was for that. My understanding, or my guess, might be that any more than 50% would constitute a primary use, a change of use to the residence.
Another question popped in my head, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
So thinking about like, let's say a temporary outbuilding, not actually part of the residence. Do you believe that application kind of contemplates, because I can understand maybe some misunderstanding of an applicant saying, well, it's a covered building, even though it's not actually a residence where people, live, do their sleeping, eating, cleaning, or whatever. Is that outbuilding sometimes considered part of the residence, I guess is the question?
Thank you for the question. If the outbuilding was a habitable building.
Can you define habitable for me?
Something that's not a storage shed, essentially. That it's conditioned, includes, it can include working plumbing, doesn't need to, but it also might include electricity or some kind of air conditioning or HVAC, essentially. And if that is, in fact, habitable, then it would be included in the total square footage. So if the outbuilding in size is greater than 50% the total area of outbuilding plus primary building, then that could cause some issues.
So detached garage could be considered that as well, because generally it has electricity and, okay.
It could be, but a garage is not habitable.
By permit.
I mean, unless it's converted, but a garage as is not considered habitable area.
Okay.
Can we see page 2? We went through page 1.
Oh, page 2 is just a reiteration of the ordinance.
Oh, okay, so it's just the ordinance. Thank you.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure.
Okay, if no more questions, I'll open it up for public comment.
Madam Mayor, the city clerk's office received 10 emails for this discussion item, and we have at present 3 speaker cards. The first of the 3 is from Sue Smrikar.
Oh, she had to go, okay.
And the second speaker card is from Steve Rosker.
Evening again. I did file a email comment, which is pretty lengthy and long-winded that I am. I would never get it done in 3 minutes. So I really just prepared to say at this point that I really appreciate the interaction between council, planning commission. I was at the planning commission the other day. They are getting up to speed on it, the whole thing, and I'm sure they'll be getting back after this one too. And the meeting is postponed till April 18th, I understand. The overview is I read about the fee waivers that you were proposing. I support that for the most part. I think it's a good idea. The home occupancy, whether we're amending it, I read it. I'm a little less confused after seeing Josh's graphs about if you oppose it, you go to this and we amend it, because otherwise I'd say if it's not broken, don't try to fix it. I don't think it's really broken. It just needs to be enforced. City attorney called it an administration issue a couple weeks ago, and I agree with that. It's how to enforce it. But if we can amend it and make it a more positive description of what's allowed and what isn't allowed, small parties, R1, none, we're all for it. I supplied a list of signatures that I presented to the Planning Commission last year of residents throughout Sierra Madre. It's like 32 people that are supporting our movement. And I think you guys may have been, I may have sent that with it back in December. But if not, you will have seen it on the one tonight. And I appreciate all your efforts that you're taking. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Madam Mayor, the next speaker card is from Vicky Kadarian.
Thank you for giving me this chance to speak. I live across the street. I've seen the parties. I've seen the fights. I've seen the traffic. I've heard the noise. I'm wondering, will there be alcohol? Because there has been in the past. There's a school on the end of the block. These people don't have their kids home. A lot of people do have their kids home. It's a residential neighborhood, and we know each other. I know them. They know me. I'm not real excited about strangers in the neighborhood casing my house. They do, because you're dressed nice, because you're cute, because it's a party doesn't mean you're sweeties. And now there's shootings. We hear shootings all the time. We don't have them in Sierra Madre. Do we get police officers there? Do we have 2 uniformed police officers there? I want to feel safe. That's it. I just want to feel safe.
Appreciate that, thank you.
Madam Mayor, there are no other speaker cards submitted.
Thank you. Then I will bring it back to council, and I will suggest that we follow the recommendation of our city attorney, and perhaps maybe we can put back on the screen the direction and the 3 questions for our consideration.
Do you prefer the one slide with all questions or each one with the flow chart?
I like them all.
Can you split screens? Put them all up?
I guess let's start with, I can keep track of the questions if we want to start with the flow charts, because I think the flow charts correspond to each question, correct?
Yes, the one with the yellow diamonds. Next couple ones. Yeah, that one.
Right, so,
This one confuses me.
Me too.
Good. You want to start?
No, it's just because we're not, it's my understanding there's not supposed to be outdoor commercial business anyway, so.
well, under discretion it can, that's one of the reasons why it goes to staff for a discretionary permit.
the DHOP,
If a portion is going to be outside. So let me just read the question and then we can look at the flow chart. So the question as presented is, should home occupation permits continue to be permitted for business activity outside of fully enclosed structures through the discretionary process? So I think our choice here in terms of a yes, no, if the answer is no, then we're going to have to amend the ordinance to just say that home occupancy permits are not permitted, period, without, with or without discretion for activity outside of an enclosed structure. And then I think if the answer is yes, then we, as the flow chart shows, we can talk about maintaining the current status quo or suggesting that additional parameters and, maybe more objective standards be considered. Does that capture what you're looking for?
Correct.
Okay, so I guess we should just start with the first diamonds in orange. What are folks thinking about the yes, no at that level?
So I'm looking at slide 5, talking about things that are permitted by right and that are permitted with discretion. I'm trying to contemplate if any of those require outdoor.
Just the examples?
Yeah.
And I don't, and to be clear, Planner Wolf, that these are just examples that you've provided. These are not examples that are in the code?
That's correct. These are examples that have been permitted.
Right, okay. So we don't, currently don't provide illustrative or exhaustive lists of potential types of use, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So, sorry, proceed.
No, that's, I think this is kind of my starting point to think about, because, we always have those unintended consequences, and we want our residents that have legitimate businesses that they run in their homes to continue to do that and not exclude something that we're not kind of thinking about. I know it's impossible to think about everything, but we want to make sure that we're not changing the mode of someone's business that's not just really disturbing their neighbors.
So I'm gonna categorize your answer is that we should allow it to be discretionarily considered to issue HOPs for outdoor businesses.
Because I can contemplate like private art lessons being like an outdoor type of activity. Could be indoor, but I can contemplate it being outdoor and not being detrimental to the peace and welfare of an R1 zone. But, that's just an example.
Yes, okay.
And then would there be more, as the flow chart shows, would there be more, I mean, the discretion would be with the planning department. Would we give more direction of what would be those allowances versus not? For instance, frequency, do they impact with traffic? Do they impact with noise? I mean, that's the problem we're running into.
I'm thinking, because do customers visit, right? And I'm thinking, when I was a kid growing up, a lot of my friends went to somebody's house to have piano lessons, and that would, to me, that would be under the constructs of an HOP, the way we're looking at it, a continuous business that's occurring in a residence.
That's indoors.
That's indoors, but I'm saying the art lesson could be outdoor, and that's I don't know. I'm just trying to make sure we're contemplating these issues.
I'm just gonna say, and I know that typically I'm the last to speak, but I'm just gonna maybe frame this in a way. I'm gonna say that generally speaking, the way I feel about all of this is that we should have our ordinances allow for flexibility and discretion, but given the concerns that have been raised, try to at least establish objective standards for the problems that we are seeing occur in terms of duration, frequency, number of visitors, types of visitors. I mean, all of the kinds of things that we are seeing that is not working currently, because that to me is what needs to be fixed. I'm not generally in favor of just amending our codes to not permit things, both because I think it doesn't allow us to be nimble, and for the concern that you raised about unintended consequences, which is somewhat why we're in the current situation that we're in. So that's I mean, and I'm not talking specifically about this slide. I think that sort of applies generally. So if that's helpful, if other people, agree with that approach, then I think that we can kind of navigate this conversation.
I think you coherently and clearly articulated what I was trying to say. So,
Okay.
Thank you. No, that's where I'm sitting.
And at least for specific, measurable, and enforceable standards.
Very reasonable approach.
Yeah.
Very reasonable.
I think we want to really focus and provide some direction on that specific measurable and enforceable approach. I get a little bit uncomfortable with the outdoor side of it. I think that's where we've run into problems with it. And I worry that if we do this again, we get into the homeowners' rights to have parties and to have celebrations and things like that, and someone running a business, and that's where we came into, like, if we were to set a measurable standard on this, we did that. We said 25 people, and
well, no, let's be clear. That's different. That's TUPs.
So
This is someone who's coming in to.
I understand, but then so then what's the number that we would have? Like, what direction should we give to have for because if we're going to have measurable and enforceable standards, then we would need to be thinking about what type of number is on our mind. You shook your head, so
because again, if you look at the other cities and the examples that were coming in, the measurable changes would be the traffic, the amount of cars in the neighborhood, the noise outside or even inside, I guess, the noise or any
number of people in the property is one.
It's not for the business. It's only for not for the HOP, for the is it the adaptive? I can't remember the title of that exact HOP.
Adaptive reuse under a conditional use permit.
Yeah, and also not for, the number was only for the certain list of home businesses, not for sorry, I have to look up the language because I'm not.
I don't remember seeing any of them that allowed outdoor use. Is there one that you remember that had outdoor use? Because I don't remember any that allowed.
Some of them are not explicit.
Yeah.
The ones that are explicit do not.
Permitted with discretion.
Yeah.
Yes.
Permitted by right, permitted with discretion.
Okay, so Robert's question is I think the key question here. I mean, we're gonna say they can permit this with discretion, administrative discretion, isn't it our job to give them some outlines on what that might be? Some parameters? They go, I mean,
I
right
think-
now, using a TUP, they can do 25.
But
less
that's
than
that's in
25.
discussion too right now.
Yeah, I know that,
Yeah.
but I
No,
mean,
no, I
but
think it's
that,
important.
but the numbers we're talking about, seems to me the neighbors are completely against that kind of a gathering, at least with the Lavender Marketplace issue. So what would be something wouldn't be, I don't know.
And I'm
Follow
on
me?
line with you. I'm feeling like an HOP has to be kind of that small business that somebody's working in the corner.
Right.
Occasionally somebody comes over to, consult with. The other type of business that we're discussing would be contemplating under an adaptive reuse on a CUP or just a plain old CUP.
Exactly.
But to be clear, what I heard city attorney say is that, for example, I could not get a CUP for my house because I do not have historic homes, so I would not qualify for adaptive reuse, and I'm not within the entrepreneurial zone, overlay. So I would not be eligible to have a CUP to have an ongoing business, and I could not have a dentist office in my building, in my house, given where I am and the
our
nature of
general
my house.
plan doesn't want it either. So I
Right,
think
so,
it's
so I guess what I'm saying is, I wouldn't say that someone should just go get a CUP, because it's pretty limited who can get a CUP, outside of what we're talking about. Because these are sort of conditional use
Yeah.
permits as well.
But I feel there's a reason for that.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree, I just wanna make sure that we're
We're
focusing the.
Yes.
We're an exception to all the other cities that are in the table, right? South Pasadena, interior only. San Marino, interior only. Alhambra, interior only. We go through, San Gabriel doesn't state, but all the others are interior only. So.
Which is interesting, because when they list the businesses, they aren't all interior businesses. Like when I went through the list, I was like, wait, that's outdoor, like, gardening.
There was one that was gardening, but it
Yeah.
was, but they're raising plants, right? They're
Yeah.
raising plants to sell.
Yeah.
It's not like so yes, it's an outdoor activity, but it's not outdoor activity with people, right?
So they come to buy them.
Plant nursery.
It's
Plant
like a
nursery.
yeah.
Yeah, that's the question is do they sell them there?
Yeah, I guess. I
Yeah.
didn't think about that. So I like some of it, like no more than 6 additional vehicles on, and have to have parking on the dwelling. Like, those are kind of measurable. I'm imagining someone who wants to like have an outdoor yoga class like once in a while for like 6 people or something like that, 6 vehicles or.
City Council, if I may.
Yes, please.
In the R1 zone, a permitted use does include agricultural use, including wholesale.
Oh. That's covered.
So
I just to be.
struggle with the outdoor. Like we're finding some ability, some examples of it, but I think they're corner cases, and I'm leaning towards not allowing the outdoor use, because I'm not seeing the compelling reason. I'm not seeing that there's a lot of businesses that we're able to come up with. I mean, the one exception that comes clear in my mind would be like a daycare. Like a daycare, you want the kids to get outside. But other than that, I'm struggling with that.
But I would assume you would need a conditional use permit to run a daycare, not an HOP, or am I wrong in my assumption?
Family daycare, I believe, is covered under state mandates.
Oh, so completely different.
Micro kitchens, daycares, and residential care facilities for the elderly, those types of businesses, those are all preempted under state law, so they can operate separate from our ordinance
Wherever is what you're saying?
in residential zones.
So I guess, Senior Planner Wolf, what would be helpful is part of the guidance that you're looking for is for the council to debate and propose standards, or is part of the process that you would envision the Planning Commission and staff undertaking is determining sort of which standards, would be helpful to have, and then how to set them? Or is that something that you're looking for guidance from us?
So the latter, the Planning Commission, I'm seeking direction from the City Council whether the Planning Commission should or should not consider those standards.
Okay, so I don't think we have to get too far into whether it's 10 or 25 or 62 or whatever, and even what standards. I mean, I think, the ordinances that you provided are helpful because we can see what other cities have considered, to include in their ordinances with respect to, enforceable standards. Now, here we may have a problem because, as Mayor Pro Tem noted, a lot of them don't permit outdoor businesses, so we may have less local examples, but I presume there's probably other examples to be found that, folks have thought about what types of limitations and standards they want for outdoor activity. So I think
I'd be willing to go along with the outdoor with that very clear criteria. I'll go that far, but I'm leaning. It may come before us, and I don't want to cause problems, so I'm going to state this clearly now, is it may come before us, and if the criteria aren't really clear, I may send it back to Planning Commission and say, let's just do it indoor.
Okay.
So, where I'm kind of struggling is when I read the municipal code as stated, and kind of contemplate the public commenter and what was said, the actual municipal code in its spirit is good. And if that outdoor use falls within the spirit of our current code, that's on page 2 of the staff report, I feel like it's okay. That's kind of where I'm sitting. Because I read the code and I don't think there's a lot of ambiguity on like what's not allowed, and what the spirit of it is. So I feel as though, that's how I'm sitting.
I do know that part of our discussion last week, and I think it might be in the staff report as well, is that the traffic condition, I think was one of the specific things that staff was looking for more objective standards as to how to determine what's above normal.
Yeah.
And so so to your point.
Within like the indoor portion, I don't.
No, I think just overall, right?
Yeah.
But that would also then.
But an outdoor
That
event
would apply to-
an outdoor event that follows the municipal code, I think would not be burdensome to an R1 area.
Yes, no, I agree with that. But I think there's places in which staff wants these
Yes,
these
no, I agree.
conditions to
But
be more objective.
if we're talking about the outdoor use portion right now.
But 1785 40F.
What page?
We don't have these as numbered, which,
Okay, all right, so I'll read the section of the code. All aspects of the home occupation shall be conducted entirely within an enclosed structure.
Council, Mayor Pro Tem,
that's permitted by right.
yeah, there are two separate.
Oh, we're talking discretionary.
Yeah.
Thank you for the correction. Okay.
17.85.040 A through H would be what we're discussing.
No,
right?
no, we're talking 050, not 040. We're talking discretionary. Yeah, okay. I'm sorry, if you said 50, I thought I heard 40.
I did say 40.
Okay.
They're kind of both. They work together. Okay, so I think we're cataloging this as this path, yes, measurable. So I don't think we're not gonna take a vote. So we're just gonna do this like one by one.
Yeah, and I feel that gives direction, and it still lives within the spirit of the Muni Code.
Okay, so then the second question, should home occupations be permitted to allow small events in residential zones? That's the next flow chart. This one.
And that doesn't say small commercial events, it just says small events.
Well, these are kind of commercial events by nature, because these are occupation permits, right? So this is in
Ongoing.
conjunction with your
So
business.
commercials only, okay.
Like, yes.
Because that's how some loopholes could happen. It's like, oh, that's not a commercial event, I'm having friends over. So that's what I was just kind of.
So if, based on our previous discussion, then we're gonna be yes on this one as well.
If I may,
Yes, please.
small events could apply to both a permitted and a discretionary home occupation, so this is a wider scope.
Ah, okay. So for that, my feeling would be, is you have to go through discretion, you shouldn't be allowed by right. I'll put my stake out there on that one.
Well, just to be clear, to be able to be by right, it would have to conform with all of the, traffic, appearance of the structure, no use of the garage, no signing, no objectionable, odors, noise, et cetera.
Right.
And it has to be entirely within an enclosed structure, no more than 50% of the floor area, and no on-site employment. That's the only way you would get to by right. And I guess to Councilmember Garcia's point before, I suppose if there is a small event that can satisfy all of these conditions, I mean, first of all, from a practical standpoint, we're not going to know about it. So, secondly, I'm just not, to me, again, on the if it's not broke, don't fix it sort of. Yeah, I sort of feel like if it's all that, if there's anything specific there that you would want more specificity or more objective standards, to me, it's pretty hard to get a small event to match all of this, or a small event that would bother neighbors to match all of these criteria.
And I think that's the key. I was thinking outdoor, and the fact that it's indoor, that changes.
Yeah, if it's ever outdoor, it's always in discretionary. You don't have that by right.
City Council, to bring it high level, I would think that an event could include the invitation of any client or customer on site.
So again, I'm contemplating a professional business. Let's say, they have a couple people stopping by once a month or twice a year to hold a deposition or something like that. That would be considered an event? Is that what we're saying?
I'm saying it could be. Could split that to say that there's some small events might be permitted and might be okay and whatnot, and some other types of events, maybe based on the nature of the business, might require some discretion.
But I think my example actually fits within by right, if it's all those
Because
things.
that would fall under A. To me, it doesn't generate any pedestrian or vehicular traffic above which is normal or reasonable for the district in which the home is occupied. So if you're doing it periodically, then that fits this section.
And to bring it back at the high level, the regulation don't speak to any part of that.
What do you mean it doesn't speak to any part of that? To me, Part A speaks to that. So I'm confused at what it doesn't, when you say it doesn't speak to it, why do you say it doesn't speak to it? What am I missing?
Part A, unpermitted or discretionary? Oh, I'm sorry.
Permitted.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Parker. So you're right, it does speak to that, but this is where discretion can be exercised on something that is supposed to be ministerial, when we have to determine, staff have to determine what is normal or reasonable for the district in which it's located.
And so, just another high-level picture here is, there are 3 ways to have commercial uses in a residential zone. HOP is one of them. HOP should be substantively different than the adaptive reuse, otherwise why have adaptive reuse? They would be the same thing. An adaptive reuse permit, I think the policy rationale behind it, and for you to determine, is it allows something more than an HOP, because you're trying to subsidize this historic structure and the costs that go along with it. So you're going to provide some adaptive reuse that can maybe provide more revenue, but also might create more impacts. For the HOP though, what do you want it to do? Do you want it to be office professional uses and limit it to that? Or do you want to expand it also to include potentially small events like hosting in a commercial way some kind of get together of people.
Like wine and painting, like.
Weddings or dinners.
Yeah.
To me, that goes down.
It could be like an event center potentially through an HOP, small event center, but it could become an event center.
But that to me that would violate section A, right? Because it would generate pedestrian or vehicular traffic above which is normal.
I don't know, that's interpretive, because like, let's say it's Esperanza Avenue, lots of traffic, lots of parking everywhere all day, because the park is right there next to it.
And you can disregard the ordinance because we're seeking policy direction to amend the ordinance. So we're looking for what you want this HOP to do.
I mean, I think if there's going to be routine events there, that to me goes into TUP area, right? If you're going to be having,
Well, that's temporary.
well, but you do it for each event that you've got.
And Esperanza's R3, I think, anyway. I'm
Oh,
talking
you're right.
R1.
Yeah,
Right.
Esperanza.
And I guess I'm thinking about it from the opposite side, right? Like not trying to catch people who are primarily,
Tons of traffic.
primarily using their HOP to, have a professional business, but occasionally might have, a cocktail party for their clients or whatever it might be. And I'm trying not to catch people in that, but I appreciate thinking about it from the other standpoint. I would not personally view an event space as something that would, in my mind, fall within a home occupancy permit. That's, everything we've been talking about is sort of professional level. Maybe you have some clients here and there, but you're not in the business of inviting people into your home that wouldn't otherwise be there. And that, to me, is the nature of that's exactly what an event center is inviting other people into your home that wouldn't otherwise be there.
Says we could use, the suggestion again says frequency and duration can be limited by conditions placed upon the approval of a discretionary home occupation.
Yeah, I think to the mayor's point, you're absolutely capturing the spirit of a home occupancy permit. The alternative is, to me, a conditional use permit. And I know they're more difficult to get, but that's the alternative.
So are we then if we're going back to this flow chart, are we at the no, prohibit small events?
No, I think I'm at the yes, and for me, one of the measurable enforceable operation standards would be maybe we put together a list of disallowed home businesses, and to me, one of them would be event space, or event rent, event hosting, or, if that's your business is to host events, that to me could be,
And
that could be just outright an enforceable operational standard that's not something appropriate for an HOP.
And by omission, that captures your example of somebody who has a professional business that invites clients over for a cocktail party once a year.
Right, because you're not in the business of hosting this
I
cocktail
see what
party.
you're saying, that's, I get it, okay.
Yeah.
So then if we go to, say, the art class or the piano class, is that allowed?
But
Or
to
is that
me,
Unless you did a piano recital. Right?
Yeah.
Outside.
No.
People could hear
I mean,
it.
the thing that's different about the art class or the piano to me is that it's one at a time, right? So to your point, you're right. My standard actually probably would prohibit piano lessons, but that isn't, because they're inviting one person into their home at a time. That they're not increasing. They're sort of, and this is the problem that you're facing. I'm sure this is what we've now just sort of come upon is why.
Well, we can make that, they can make that measurable. Planning Commission can look at the frequency, duration.
Well, and number of people.
And then if we provide certain types of businesses that are just not susceptible to HOP. I think that sort of creates the measurable, like one person at a time, 2 cars, 3 people, whatever it is, gets us to kind of to avoid having to create an objective positive standard, and then we can carve out things that we don't mean it to intend to cover.
Yes, and then if I can ask for clarification, to disallow a certain kind of event or uses as home occupations isn't to say that it couldn't otherwise be permitted as a temporary use.
Right.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Right, yeah, we were talking specifically about someone who wants the home occupancy permit, so I just take it as for granted that this is something that's gonna be continuous. and not susceptible to a.
If you, so your question is, if you have an HOP, you can still get a TUP for something else.
For small events.
Yeah.
So if you're doing that piano class, you want to do the recital.
You just get a TUP.
Right.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Reasonable.
So I think, I mean, the way I'm hearing it is it's a handful of people, right? I don't know if a number makes sense or not. I think we defer to staff, but the general impression I'm getting is we're looking at, you know, a smaller number of people and indoors.
When is the planning commission going to hear this? Because like we said, we want to have public input as much as we can.
18th, you said? No, the 18th
No,
is.
that's the TUP
So
continuation.
this will be even farther out.
Further out, okay.
Further out, yes.
So I would hope that there would be continued public input, and that would go into
That'd be good.
their calculus and what
Right.
goes into the.
Speaking of that, Josh, Planner Wolf, I really appreciate the QR codes and the asking to be put on the mail list. Because we do have people who currently have home occupancy permits and business licenses that might overlap, is there any way we can just automatically add those folks to the mailing list? And so, because we might not know the examples of people who currently are running businesses, we're coming up with lots of examples on our own, but it'd be good for them to know that this is coming about, and maybe then they can say, but I'm doing this. Nobody seems to care, but don't accidentally disallow it, or may have their own considerations. Is that a possibility?
We can work that out wherever emails exist on these
Yeah,
applications.
exactly. All right, so are we good on this one?
Do you want to ask, because we talked about TUPs being permitted for these small events, does that mean that we're going with the no side here?
We're going with the yes with a measurable and enforcement operation standard, and with that being what we would disallow, what would we not allow. In other words, like one city says, no nightclubs, no. You're right.
Because a TUP can have like 75 people, right? So
Yeah.
it's not that, I wouldn't consider that a small event.
So it's not the no, because then the purpose would be that if this is on the no list, you can apply for a TUP for whatever's on the no list, like a piano recital or a wine celebration at your real estate or accounting office for people to come over and share wine.
So like
Well,
a
we're not going to
small
exclude those
event-
people, so hopefully not, right? So.
Council, I think what Josh might be asking is, if you're saying that all these types of, music recitals, whatever, are gonna be funneled through the TUP process, then why would you ever need an HOP for small events? What small events are contemplated under an HOP?
No, I think we got to go back to what the mayor said. She's saying there's certain types of businesses that might be excluded from having an HOP. Therefore, a small event doesn't even exist because you don't have an HOP anyway. Right? Was that?
No, I think the question is in the reverse, though. If you have an HOP, you're the piano teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have to get a TUP for a piano recital where 20 people are going to come? Because that's below the threshold of our. I mean, I know TUPs are also under.
Okay.
But all small events here, like the example would be in-person services with a professional service requires, you have 4 people coming over to discuss, a real estate transaction, or short-term rentals, of course, or art classes occasionally held on site. You want to have a wine painting night with like 4 or 5 people, or whatever the numbers they determine is measurable. That would exclude all small events.
Also, it's really difficult to write an ordinance where you're saying this specific business is prohibited, this specific business, it's a really difficult ordinance to write, because you gotta contemplate all the possible types of businesses.
So that's where my mind's leaning towards the numbers. Like, and I'll just throw out a number, and this is completely for staff to consider, like half a dozen. Like, if you're gonna have half a dozen people, that's a decent meeting, a decent, you could have a number of kids and their siblings coming for piano lessons, or a small yoga class, or something like that. That, to me, somewhere in that range. Once you start getting more than that, then indoors, like, you're starting to, like, you're gonna be in more than one room, and maybe that's fine, but I think at some level, having some sort of measurable number seems to make sense to me.
But don't you feel that's how the last permit found so many problems, is that they put a number at 25, even though it's a temporary.
I suspect that our public commenters would not like unlimited 5-people events every weekend.
Indoors, though?
Yes, because they're, worried about traffic and worried
Traffic.
about 5
Yeah.
more cars in their street and.
So that's why I said
Yeah.
like the frequency, like I like their examples, frequency and duration.
Yeah.
I mean, your example, I was contemplating one family car with siblings and coming to a
Right.
lesson together, and that wouldn't be. But then, to your point or other points, it could be 5 separate cars, right?
Can I ask, Mr. City Attorney, why couldn't we just specify event hosting businesses? Is that not, can that be parsed in some way legally?
I mean, I think I'd prefer something like that as opposed to saying specific types of businesses, because that's a general term that we might be able to apply if we can come up with a general definition for that term.
Yeah, that's what I was contemplating.
Smart.
It seems to me like we ought to be talking about that.
Well, then it seems to me it also opens up, it changes the construct of the ordinance, so that if we do have other businesses we didn't think of before that create a new problem, we already have a construct in the ordinance for here's types of businesses that are not susceptible to an HOP, and then you can just add to that as other problems arise, right? Like someone wants to have a, boxing ring or a nightclub, as someone mentioned before. Which I guess is not technically an. But it seems to me that. I guess the question is, what are we trying to do with allowing small events under an HOP?
I want to go back to Councilmember's comment, Councilmember Goss. I think within your comment that type of business isn't even allowed in HOP anyway, given the Muni code, right? So.
Where would you see that getting kicked out?
Well, permitted A, right? Right there. If that's the normal course of business and it's creating.
Then, if that's true, then all we have to do is just give staff direction on how to interpret the language of the ordinance.
You shall not generate any pedestrian or vehicular traffic above which is normal or reasonable for the district where the home occupation is located.
Right.
Right? And so that type of business wouldn't, by the current municipal code, it's not even allowed.
Right, unless the pedestrian or vehicular traffic is at or below
Yes.
normal.
But is this the problem you're struggling with?
The problems you're struggling with is the problems I'm struggling with.
Yeah. We're all struggling together. Well, then I think it's boiling down to creating some objective standards for pedestrian and vehicular traffic, and then maybe that's all that you need to then, navigate small events. Because if the small event is not going to generate pedestrian or vehicular traffic above that objective standard, then it's allowed, and nobody should care.
And,
Right.
and based on testimony you heard last time, it's not just parking and traffic on the street where the home is. It also bleeds to other streets, so how do you deal with that? How do you
That's
apply the
above,
standard to the
yeah.
other streets?
That would be above.
It says the district where the home occupancy is located, so if you.
So that could do it, the word district.
Yeah,
right?
it already says that.
How do you interpret district there? Is that like a block or 2 blocks or what?
Could be a geographical vicinity, or
Okay.
we consider the zone a district of itself.
I think
Yeah,
also we
because I like the example of other places, like, there might be an R1 zone that's near Esperanza, that maybe that could handle more traffic
Mariposa.
than a truly insulated
Yeah.
R1 zone.
And it also, I think the how to enforce this is kind of like it would be if you have lots of complaints of noise violations and traffic and like a party, like too many parties, like the houses that have too many parties, then that's enforceable through the police department and then through their enforcements. If they get called to that house on a noise violation or after hours.
There's administrative remedies.
Yeah, there's already administrative remedies already in our code.
So if we boil this down to perhaps, at least with respect to this issue, we can strengthen or make more objective the pedestrian and vehicular traffic measurement to essentially get at this without having to specifically address small events?
I believe so.
We need our VMT.
Yeah, yeah.
Can you apply this to this, please? Can you?
From 2020, 2016.
2016.
Environmental impact.
If not, I think you've gotten the gist of sort of where we're coming from. I mean, I think we're at the point now where we're trying to find fixes for the code, and that's not exactly what you want us to do, but I think you've gotten a sense of like kind of where.
So right now, when code enforcement goes out, they only have like a vague idea of what constitutes inappropriate traffic or parking. So what we're talking about is giving them something, so when he goes out, it's a, boom, he sees it, he knows it.
Right, and it's also a difficulty in determining who the violator is.
So we could specify numbers, but we're not sure if some people are with that house or not. He's not sure when he's there.
That's correct.
I'll say vehicular and traffic measurements are going to be very difficult to enforce practically. Pedestrians are walking on the street at different times of day. Whenever our code enforcement officer gets there, that's the point in time he's going to make his measurement. It's very difficult to enforce.
See, that to me is like where it goes back to like, and I know that I think I'm in the minority on this, is like the number of people in a house. Like, I know we got into trouble.
That's also hard too. He's not gonna go in and count, is
Yeah.
he?
Well, is a knock on the door at that point, though?
Well, you can't still go inside that house. Like, he's not gonna be like, I get to go inside your home.
And that's how, oh, sorry.
But if it is a home occupancy permit, doesn't that give you some right to?
No, you still have definite protections, constitutional protections.
Well, what is the code enforcement for number of people? I mean, like, how would we even determine if there were too many people in the home at a given time?
Well, I have no idea, but I would say the distinction we're trying to draw here is, instead of looking at a specific standard to apply, like a development standard or something like that, look at the use. What uses do you want? Because uses are a lot easier to enforce against than standards. If you see the distinction.
Yeah, because the use you would apply at the time of that the permit is.
We would know ahead of time. They're gonna they're gonna ask for
it.
something. Yeah. They're gonna ask for it in their business license application. They're gonna ask for it in their permit, and we'll know what use they're seeking. But the way they conduct that use, that's a hard thing for us to enforce against.
So you think the vehicular standards are not useful?
I don't know. The planning commission can give it a shot, but it'll be difficult.
So maybe that's the guidance we give, is to look at what types of uses, what categories of uses. Maybe that's the direction we go.
But isn't this exactly what we've done the opposite of in terms of our commercial zoning ordinances? We've gotten away from defining what things can be permitted because those were like outdated 5 minutes after they got.
Those get really specific, bowling alleys, things like that. What I'm thinking of is a more general thing, like consulting services or classrooms or training or something like that. We talked about like small events or event spaces. Do you see, is that differentiated enough? Is there enough there that?
I guess it would depend on the categories, right? Like, the problem that we have in all of this is that we are roughly trying to revise our permits to address specific, or not our permits, our ordinances to address a specific problem. And for example, what you just said about classrooms does provide a loophole for the specific problem that people have raised, right? Having people over for art classes as a classroom could provide someone the opportunity to host events, right? So, I mean, I guess that's my problem with the categories, is that I think it opens up a whole different way to define yourself in a way that allows for this.
But then why couldn't you do frequency?
We can. I think the way we were thinking about it on the staff side was, small events is a type of use. How that small events use is defined, we're gonna leave to the Planning Commission to come up with that definition. But as a concept, do we want an HOP to authorize small events in a
No.
residential zone?
I think no then. I mean, if that's the way you're framing it, because what we're saying is, I mean, at least me, I'm trying to prevent someone who's running a business that's not about events from getting caught up because they have an event as part of their business just by the nature of, of something they're doing, but they're not in the business of events.
So you want
So
small
because
events
we-
kind of defined?
So it goes back to Councilmember Lowe's, is frequency. Like, I don't get the sense that we're saying we want to prevent people from having an occasional gathering of people over, but it's the routine item. Or are we saying no small events, whatever?
like a weekly thing.
Go down to the
I think we could say, I mean, I just sort of the way this conversation is going, I think we could say that home occupancy or occupation permits are not intended to provide a permit for having events. I mean, that's not what the permit is for. So if your business is to do events, then you will not be allowed to do so under an HOP. I think is what we're
So
saying.
what about, okay, so then
So
that's
then I
true,
think, I mean,
yeah.
honestly, from a practical standpoint, if you have legal services in your home and you have an HOP and you have some clients over one time, the fact of the matter is, no one's gonna complain. And so like, no, you're not gonna be in violation because you're not gonna,
And if-
you might technically be in violation for that one moment, but
And even if you don't have an HOP, you might have some clients over.
yeah, that's true.
That's
And
just-
nobody's gonna complain.
Yeah.
Well, even the examples that were in our presentation, if it says like a workshop, art classes occasionally on site, so occasionally could be a stated frequency, once every 2 months. Like, once every 2 months, let's say my mom used to do an art class.
The problem
Or-
is that's also an enforcement issue because unlike some of the neighbors here, my neighbors probably are not tracking what I do, and so who's gonna?
Then no one's gonna complain.
Fair, but
If that
then,
was-
again,
Again, self-policing, it's taking care of itself because it is, we're seeing this frequency happen. They'll even state when their workshops were, and that can be, and they'll have to say, nope, I can only do this once every 2 months.
I hear you, but what I'm saying is that if we put it in the code, there's gonna be an expectation of enforcement, and there's no way for our code enforcement to know if Ed's home business is doing 2 events or 3 events.
It's gonna be
And my
like
neighbors don't know I have a home business. Right. I mean,
Well, they do now.
Yeah.
We all do.
If they're watching.
It'll be like those underground
Well,
things,
I've
like
told them.
sneak in every 5 minutes to come take this art class,
Are we circling the drain?
Yes,
or do
we
you
are,
have-
we have gone and,
So we still haven't answered the question, but.
well, I guess I need clarity on what you're thinking about, cause I don't think I was thinking the same thing about small events, the way that you and the city attorney were thinking of it in terms of presenting this question. So I don't think that the HOP, I think we've determined the HOP should not be used to have an event business that puts on small events of any kind, but,
No, the idea,
Go ahead.
the idea was not to focus the scope on event centers or anything related to that. It was more of a wider scope, and maybe small events was not the right term, but something that would draw that pedestrian or vehicular traffic above that which is normal. Again, to Robert Parker's comment, determination of what is normal is, I think, key here.
and I don't think we're in a position to give you advice on how to make that objective. Like, we're not gonna have ideas about how to use, traffic studies or measurable vehicular traffic. So that might be just something that needs to be explored by staff and the planning commission maybe, and using other municipalities, taking their lead, because I don't think we're not subject matter experts to be able to provide how to measure that.
If it's not measurable, if we're having a hard time in measuring it, do we lean towards no?
No, I don't.
Okay.
But that's because we have a different definition. I think some of the definitions that he meant, small events, is what you guys are interpreting necessarily seems more like, like a party versus like a workshop or
Or versus a type of business that's
Yeah.
going to repetitively or all the time perhaps have more people there than would be normal for traffic. Is that what you're worried about?
Perhaps, yes.
Types of businesses that routinely have 5 people at a time.
May I reframe the question?
Yes, please.
So should a home occupation allow for occasional vehicular and pedestrian traffic above that which is normal?
Define occasional, I guess.
Yeah, that's
Well,
the problem,
occasional up to the planning commission to determine.
Yeah. Because again, like if you're interpreting that they can have no small events, according to the examples that we're seeing, that means no in-person services where it requires in-person presence of a client, no workshops at all,
No yoga.
no yoga with the goats.
That's a different, don't. That's a different ordinance.
See what I'm saying? When you say no, if you look at the examples of what the planning department is interpreting as small events.
Well, I don't think having no events means no clientele. I mean, if you have one person who comes to your house, that's not above the normal.
When a professional service requires the in-person presence of a client.
Requires.
And don't feel limited by this, the code as written now, because we're seeking policy direction on ways to amend this code. So what do you want the HOP to do is what we're seeking clarification on.
I guess maybe look up the maybe the language. Maybe it's just synonyms, maybe it's just what.
I think the code is clear.
Okay.
We're just having enforcement issues on whether or not something's allowable.
Okay.
I mean, I think we know whether or not something's allowable under the code. It's just, I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess if it says required, I mean, you can look at the nature of a business and say, is this something that requires in-person clientele? Like continuous requirement, like there might.
Where does it say requires? I'm not seeing it.
Slide 6.
Okay.
Home occupation, and it's not in the code right now. This is what we're talking about.
Okay,
Some-
that's where I was.
Well, I'm not sure if it's in the code.
It is not in the code.
Okay. But if the question is, should HOPs allow small events in residential zones?
Yeah, the code just talks about employment and not
Oh.
patrons.
Right.
I think it was Alhambra, one other code said 3 clients or allowable. But I guess that too can go to planning commission.
And, Mr. City Attorney, does employment also include, let's say, like someone working as a contractor or a temp worker or something of that nature? That might need to be cleaned up?
We can clarify that language. I wouldn't characterize an independent contractor as employment, but
Within the scope of the like,
But
Assembly Bill
someone's
5, you're kind of thinking about,
yeah,
right? So
yeah, but if
it's
someone's a seasonal worker, a seasonal employee, a
Or a
temporary
temp.
employee, a part-time employee, a full-time employee, I would think those are all employees.
Okay.
But not like your bookkeeper that you contract with.
Right. I wouldn't.
So that if you got really busy, you couldn't hire part-time help to come over and help you unless it's your wife.
And my kids.
Yes.
That's the business model.
They're already on the books, right? Yeah. Should we move on? Have we given enough?
I doubt it. I mean, I think the parameters that I'm hearing are home occupation permits should not be permitted to allow for the business of events. We do want to provide some measure of flexibility for those permits, people who hold those permits to have small events, and I think the key is going to be figuring out what the parameters around those are. And I think we're all we've talked about the ones, frequency, size, duration.
And are we in agreement at doing it at the license point? Because to me, like, we keep seeing the problems of it after the license is issued. We do it at the point of issuing the license.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean.
So we basically, when we issue the business license, it says, here are the terms and conditions of your business license. You can have so many events or so many people or whatever it is, and then if there's ever a complaint or if there's ever a problem with it, the administrative remedy is very easy. You revoke the business permit and they have to immediately stop. Whereas if it doesn't say so, if it's not a condition of the business license, then it's very hard. I mean, it's still going to be hard to enforce, but at least it's clear up front, and then you could prohibit activities before they even get their license.
Yeah, I think I envision it being in the code, so I think that would then be what triggered the ability to enforce, because you're then in violation of the code even if you have a permit. Because the permit was issued on the basis that you're going to comply with the conditions in the code, and if you don't comply with the conditions in the code, then the remedies, there's a warning, and then, whatever the process is.
I'll ask a question to staff, though, to clarify that point. When specific conditions are imposed on a business that are not reflected in the code, but you impose them discretionarily, is that reflected in the business license, or is that reflected in the zoning entitlement contemplated here?
The latter.
In the zoning entitlement?
Yes.
Right.
So what does that mean?
So, actually, before I answer, let me follow up then. Does the business license say they have to comply with the conditions of the zoning entitlement? Do you know?
I don't believe so.
So that's something we can change on our end, because what it should say is your business license is contingent upon you complying with all the conditions in your zoning entitlement, so we pull their business license if they don't comply with the zoning entitlement to get to the goal that you're seeking.
Cross default.
That
Okay.
sounds very promising.
All right, I think we're on question 3, even though question 2 did not go very well.
Better sausage than last meeting, though.
Yeah, at least it's organized sausage.
Yes, so thank you. The flow diagrams actually are really helpful.
Okay, the third question is, given that residentially zoned historic landmarks may currently be converted to a, quote, bed and breakfast inn, small entrepreneurial business, or service or professional office if a conditional use permit is issued.
End quote.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's no end quote. Should such conversions be interpreted to allow use of the property for small events in residential zones? I guess this one confuses me because this requires something in addition, right? It requires you to actually have a CUP. And wouldn't the process of applying for and being granted a CUP cover all of this? I mean, because to me, conditional use permits are by their nature tailored to the specific situation. And so to the extent that we are nervous about a particular, CUP applicant creating these issues that small events create, wouldn't that be part of the process in issuing and crafting the CUP?
Yes, so that is the status quo, but it's not clear from an applicant perspective whether or not small events or anything related to that would be permitted, should they be seeking a conditional use permit for the event, or the use that they want. So status quo, it might be allowed, but that's fully at the discretion of the planning commission, whereas codification that describes what a small event can be can better inform an applicant as to what they might be permitted.
So we're sort of straying outside of HOPs, and now we're talking about CUPs in the context of what's in the code currently?
An adaptive reuse.
And
Right.
it would have to be adaptive reuse, right?
Is this okay? This conversation's okay?
Yeah.
Because I have some ideas about this.
Yeah, I think I know it wasn't specifically agendized as this, but I think it's related, and we're not taking an action per se.
I believe it's related too, because there's we want to allow certain things under certain conditions, but the HOPs might disallow certain things under different conditions. So no, I just want to make sure we were okay to talk about this.
And again, I don't want to blur the conversation, because I think maybe Planner Wolf and I aren't on 100% the same page on the issue of small events. But again, drawing a distinction here between an HOP and adaptive reuse. Adaptive reuse is intended to be something greater than, I think, HOP, otherwise why have adaptive reuse? So the question becomes then, and Mayor's right, you know, you impose all these standards through the CUP process. Those are standards. We're looking, I think the question here is, what uses do you want? Because there are uses in a code, and then there are the standards that limit those uses or implement those uses. Small events here is like a potential use. So like an example, can a historic property through adaptive reuse become a small event center? Hypothetical question.
I have a follow-up question. So given the staff report and the conversation around small events, does our discussion have to stay within the scope of adaptive reuse CUPs around small events?
An overlay, right?
I can't bring up something else regarding CUPs in general with adaptive reuse?
I think as it relates, yeah, I think it's fine.
Okay.
Well, you could bring it up and you say, nope.
Yeah. Well, here's my feeling. And I kind of danced around it our last time by asking a question of Senior Planner Wolf. It was, can somebody have both a Mills Act and adaptive reuse? Because I think they're trying to accomplish the same thing. And so if we can give direction for me, for Planning Commission, I feel as though that's additive and personally, I feel as though you own one of these homes, so I'll defer to you, but you can't have it both ways. That's the kind of way I think about it. I think a Mills Act is taking money out of the city and taking money out of the county, but we want to preserve homes. But then on top of it, having an adaptive reuse, they're trying to accomplish the same thing, and I feel like it's too additive and burdensome to the welfare of the city. That's kind of my feeling.
I'm in agreement with you.
I think you can have one or the other.
Exactly. I agree.
Although I suspect we might already have instances where there is both. Like, I suspect the Penny House is both a business, and I suspect it probably also has Mills Act protection, or did at one point.
I don't know.
I don't know either, but I'm just saying, like,
That would be the only, yeah.
I mean, so yes, I hear you, and I understand the logic of it. I'm not sure it's completely consistent with historical practice, which may or may not matter here, but just want to point that out. Yeah. I mean, I guess.
But it's not currently a bed and breakfast, correct? Nope.
Could also grandfather them in,
As a bed and breakfast?
whatever, however you want it.
Wait, what?
I thought they were or they still have the.
We asked that last time and they do not.
But they still have the ability to do so, I thought.
They would have to apply for a CUP.
They didn't want a CUP, I think that was what we said last meeting, correct?
They don't currently have an approved CUP. There was at one point an approved CUP, but it was
That was
never
one.
inaugurated and therefore void.
Oh,
I even
see.
think that was a different owner.
I mean, clearly the current contemplation of the adaptive reuse is to allow for things that do create, burdens on the surrounding communities, right? I mean, it clearly contemplates a bed and breakfast. Like, that would obviously involve traffic and pedestrians and more people and noise and, all of the things that happen in a bed and breakfast.
But it goes through approval process.
Yeah, the business license would go through a different approval process, I'm assuming.
Staff level, right?
Yeah,
Rather than a CUP coming to the Planning Commission.
with parking requirements and.
You're talking about the adaptive reuse?
Well, adaptive reuse needs a CUP, yeah.
In an adaptive reuse, does that mean that some changes are made to the property? Like, we think about the Penny House, and I don't know if it was originally had guest rooms, but it was very clearly that that's what it has. It's had more recently, right? And so there's rooms that are intended to be occupancy for a business, right, or for guests.
Rentals?
For what?
Rentals, she said.
Rentals.
Yeah.
So is adaptive? Does when we say adaptive reuse? Let me ask this as a question. When we say adaptive reuse, what has to be adapted at the residence for it to be an adaptive reuse?
all improvements on the property. Or all improvements that would encompass the use. So perhaps not all improvements on the property are required for the use, but in a lot of cases that would be the case. It is.
So it has to be some improvements that are made on the property that allow it for the new use.
So could I speak to the example of the penny house?
Absolutely.
So if it were to be fully converted to a bed and breakfast, there's a lot of requirements it would need to meet. ADA compliance, parking, resurfacing and releveling even, to name a few.
So it's not currently a bed and breakfast.
Nor does it have a permit to be.
Right. So if it were to become a adaptive reuse, it would have to get a CUP. Okay, I've worked with the logic in my mind.
So do we need to amend the adaptive reuse CUPs in residential zones to allow for small events?
And the issuance of a conditional use permit / adaptive reuse related conditional use permit is fully discretionary?
It's fully discretionary. There is no limitation on it, state law or otherwise.
So I guess what I'm saying, where I'm going is that if it has to go through a process, and the process can end with a a failure to issue, what standards do we really need to? Is it just for clarity, so people don't go through the process unnecessarily and spend the money for something that was doomed from the start? Or, I mean, I guess, because this strikes me as, again, I'm not interested in crafting our ordinances around one particular problem.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to solve the problem, but I'm also like, feel like it's a lot of work and a lot of energy putting into something that we're redoing our entire code based on one particular problem. And if the CUP process has public comment and lots of levels of, interaction and involvement and potential conditions placed upon it, and eventually could be denied, that strikes me as not requiring that much in the way of objective standards, because objective or not, we could just say no.
So if you have two levels of conditional of uses. There's the broader residential, commercial, industrial, manufacturing, institutional, and then going down into more granular, entrepreneurial events, bed and breakfast, etc. Now, Mayor, if what you're saying is you can use an adaptive reuse permit, a conditional use permit through the adaptive reuse process to do any commercial activity in the residential zone, subject to whatever conditions are imposed through the discretionary process. If that's what you're saying, that's totally fine, and we can make that work. I just want to confirm that's what you're saying.
Yeah, I feel like that's the way it should be, and I don't feel like we have to say yes or no to this question, because it's within the CUP, acceptance of the
The whole
CUP.
point of the process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Because if it's within the scope of the adaptive reuse for that CUP, then they can, if that's having an event, that's fine. That had been approved through the process.
Now, when we go back to CUPs and that agendized item, then it will be addressed then.
Well, adaptive reuse is a little.
To be clear, to qualify for the adaptive reuse, you have to be a designated historic landmark. So just to go back to the sort of the overlay with the Mills Act, what qualifies you as a potential applicant for adaptive reuse? What's the objective qualification for historic or whatever our standard is?
A designated landmark in a residential zone.
So I do think, because we've done this as a council, and I don't think we typically think about it, but we should be sort of considering as part of that discussion about designating historic landmarks this, because I mean, in general, this is a pretty narrow group of people, right? I mean, this isn't opening up the floodgates because there's only so many historic landmarks in town, but I'm not sure we always consider, when we give that distinction, the follow-on effect of allowing potentially to expand the universe of folks that are qualified for this.
But are you saying that going through the Mills Act process, that we would want to consider adaptive reuse?
No, I'm just saying that whenever we've considered designating something as a historic landmark, I'm not sure it's ever come up like, oh, by the way, we should remember, if we designate this as a historic landmark,
It can then
this
do
gives
this.
this person the ability to
Become a bed
avail
and breakfast.
itself of
Got it.
of an adaptive reuse. Again, it's fully discretionary, so it can still be no, but we just have to be cognizant of the fact that if we're slowly expanding that pool.
I have a question then too. When we were discussing the green and green home, and we decided, we learned that there are some designated historical landmarks in Sierra Madre that are not, the designation is questionable. It was done by a previous committee that they didn't necessarily want the designation. Do all of these like let's say the homes that we're kind of looking at, does either designation qualify? Does that previous designation from years ago that doesn't really qualify for some things and the person can say, no, I don't want that anymore, are those interpreted as designated historical landmarks?
So to any property owner who at the time of passing the initiative back in 2001, I think, who opted to de-designate or delist their properties from the list of historic landmarks, that's no longer in the list. So we have a specific list for those that were retained and those that were later added on to. And that list is the only qualifier.
But it was an opt-out, not an opt-in, right? So there's still houses on that list, perhaps, that were designated by the commission it was,
Yeah.
that if the owner didn't affirmatively opt out, is still on that list, and they may or may not even
Be really
know they're on the
truly-
list, right?
Or be truly historical.
That is correct.
Okay.
Okay.
But that list is not very long, if I remember.
58 landmarks, I believe.
And again, you're right, you're correct. It would still have to go through the same process of okay or not okay, so it's not an automatic. So you're right, I don't think we have to analyze number 3 then, at this point.
I am sensitive to the part that this is going through the process of a CUP is not a small thing, like in terms of cost and effort. When someone comes to the desk or calls in and says, hey, this is what's happening, I'm qualified to do X, Y, or Z, I'm thinking about applying for a CUP, do they ever ask, like, what do you think the odds are that I'm going to get it? And are we able to give that guidance? Because I am sensitive to the fact that, like, I don't want people to invest this money and this time if it's kind of something that is unlikely to be successful.
I would say we get that question all the time. But we do hear out their proposed use, and we take a general kind of feel for that use and how it might apply to the findings, especially how it is consistent with the general plan, historic preservation ordinance, and with the context of its neighborhood. We might say for a feel that, eventually at one point when someone applies, staff reviews it to a point where they can recommend its approval to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission is the ultimate decision maker in this, and they can feel completely opposite to that.
Yeah, no, I understand that we can't provide definitive answers to folks, but are you looking for guidance that would help guide those discussions? Because I think what I'm hearing this council say is that we don't feel like this is a process that needs to be upended given the level of discretion, and maybe that's not sufficient because that doesn't provide you some objectiveness or that you're looking for.
I don't think there are enough cases of conditional use permits for the purpose of adaptive reuse or change of use for that matter that we can measure or test these waters enough. But I will say anecdotally that the full scope of use might not be contemplated through the application, and an applicant might want to change their scope at one point and say, oh, I did meant, or I thought it was implied that I would be doing this by stating this.
Yes.
If we're talking about amendments to the code, 17.82.065 is the section that deals with adaptive reuse of historic landmarks.
Page 4 of the presentation.
That section, the introductory line reads, notwithstanding any other provision of this code to the contrary, any historic landmark in a residential zone may be converted into a bed and breakfast inn, small entrepreneurial business, or service or professional office if a conditional use permit is issued. Should that be amended to read any commercial use authorized within the commercial zone under our municipal code?
Which would be an expansion.
Right, because we've called out specific things here.
Although small and entrepreneurial business is pretty broad.
And there's no definition for it, which is also kind of what small events gets at too.
Yeah.
I mean, I think based on the discussion, I mean, and people should test it based on what you just said. I mean, based on the discussion, I would say yes, because what we're saying is that given the full discretionary nature of the process, we're not talking about limiting use, and then frankly, that litany doesn't particularly limit. It doesn't provide a very illustrative list of uses anyway, because it's pretty broad. So I don't know if folks feel the same way. Like, if we're broadening this or trying to narrow it, I don't know what people's directional.
On a small entrepreneurial business, isn't that only applicable to the residential entrepreneur overlay zone?
No.
No, this is a
Adaptive
term that
reuse.
exists that doesn't have a definition, and it's not cross-referenced anywhere else. It's not a helpful term for us. But if we expanded the definition to say any commercial business or any commercial use authorized within the commercial zone in the municipal code, we have a better sense of what we're dealing with.
So I'm thinking of the residents that brought, we're talking about one in general, but we want to, one specific, but we want to keep this general. I don't think one resident has asked us to expand the uses on the HOP or on the adaptive reuse.
I mean, yes, that is true, but I'm personally not interested in limiting the adaptive reuse ordinance to specifically prohibit a certain type of business. I guess
I agree with you.
So I mean,
Yeah.
so to me, then expansion, not expansion, doesn't really address the current problem, I guess is what I'm saying. And if the expansion makes it more user-friendly for staff, that could be a benefit.
Staff and planning commission.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, but again, it's hanging a lot of, it's giving a lot of weight to the discretionary process, and we have to be comfortable, that that's going to be appropriately applied, which I'm comfortable currently.
Yes.
This is not guidance you've asked for, because, you did not sort of request specifically around what the scope, and we don't even have the adaptive reuse provision in our materials, but, is that, would that be helpful, I guess, is to make this a little more generic and not specific to this list of businesses?
So instead of listing what's currently there,
The proposal is to say, that historically designated properties in residential zones could be converted to any commercial use permitted under our commercial code if a permit is issued, I think is what you're saying, essentially. I mean, I'm also not interested in changing things that aren't broken, so I'm also.
And there's not any historical landmarks located in a residential zone currently that have been converted for adaptive reuse.
that is
Correct.
correct. I hesitate to answer the question because I don't know if, well, obviously, the uses in commercial are more expansive, but I don't know if it specifies bed and breakfast inn.
I mean,
Oh.
small entrepreneurial includes enterprising is just being, I'm going to open my own business, right? It includes almost everything. I don't know, it doesn't prohibit anything.
Just the small.
Unless we looked
small
at,
part,
but
yeah.
we don't know what I don't know what our commercial
Yeah.
licensing says.
Yeah, I think this may be outside the scope.
Yeah,
of-
because we
of
won't
what-
know what that is.
Right, yeah, and I'll just say again, the term small entrepreneurial business is just not a helpful term.
It includes everything, right?
It's just.
Or it could exclude
Right,
things,
we
right?
have no idea.
Well, it also it could theoretically include things that are prohibited by our commercial code. A small entrepreneurial business could be a
True.
massage
No,
parlor.
True, absolutely could. No, good.
I think that's where you're going? That's sort of what you're suggesting?
No, what I'm saying is we just don't know what it means. We have no idea.
So actually, changing it could also be limiting, because at least we have some parameters around what our standards in the commercial code. Like, I assume there's things in the commercial code that we don't prohibit, that we don't permit.
It's just at this moment, we couldn't speak to that because I don't know what that is.
Right, but I think the point that Councilmember Garcia is pointing out, that you could theoretically have a commercial use prohibited by our commercial code that counts as a small entrepreneurial business, and I'm not sure it matters, because then we would just say
Still has to
no.
go through the CUP.
Then we would just say no, right? I
still
mean,
has
like
to
if
go through
someone
the
says, I wanna
CUP
run a illegal card shop, we would just say no, we're not gonna give a permit to that, so.
It keeps coming back to the CUP process,
To the
is what I'm hearing.
discretionary
Yeah.
process. I'm fine cleaning it up, because I agree that small entrepreneurial business is difficult to parse, and we have standards elsewhere, so I'm fine with that if that's something that would be useful for staff, but it doesn't address the problem, the specific problem at hand, which is fine.
All right. I agree.
So, let me look at the flow chart for this one.
Should adaptive reuse CUPs in residential zones allow for small events? I don't think we have to amend it because it already is covered.
Right, so it's a yes, no, is what I'm hearing.
Right, unless we wanna take the action that the city attorney proposed that wasn't specific to small events, but just making the language
language
more
clear.
professional, or whatever you wanna say.
So a CUP would simply say, okay, if you could get it, this is the kind of event you can have, and this is how often you could do it, this is how long it would last, and this is how many people would come.
Right.
And boom.
Yeah.
I mean,
I mean, that's what we can do now, so we don't need to mess with it.
Yeah, I've said it before, I mean, to me, we have so few instances of these things in town that if we have a fully discretionary process whereby we can impose, whatever we want to it, obviously within reason, yeah, I'm not sure why we would craft code to specifically address issues that could be addressed through a tailored process.
And what I'm hearing is in the current property we're talking about, I don't think that type of CUP is gonna get passed. I just don't think that's gonna be okayed.
Right, we don't know.
Well, we don't know, but I mean.
I mean, are there
It's gonna be a tough road to
I mean,
hoe.
are there conditions in which it could? Maybe.
Maybe.
But that's not, that's not before us, and that's.
Conditions.
Yeah, that's what I mean,
Yeah,
like,
but that's the point, lots of conditions, right? Which is more than the neighborhood has now.
right. Okay, so I think where we're going with this is that we are not recommending any particular change to the adaptive reuse. If the planning commission wants to come back and present a fix for the list as the city attorney recommended, I don't think we would consider it, and I don't think we would be automatically opposed to it, but we're not directing the planning commission to do that. Does that sound fair?
Yes.
Yes.
Kind of go full circle, just to clarify, if you're doing a small, short-term rental, do you need an HOP or just a business license?
Currently, the policy direction is to apply for a home occupation permit and then get a business license for that home occupation.
So since the planning commission is gonna be looking at HOPs anyway, do we want to give them any direction on how, because from what I recall, it was a different council, but not too different. Our feeling was, we want to allow our residents to have this option, but we also want to have the tool from the revocation of a business license if we have bad actors. So I don't know that anything needs to be discussed, because we currently do have business licenses, and we can revoke those anyhow.
So I think this goes to our last task, which was questions to pose to the planning commission. So the two that you've highlighted, frequency and duration factor, I think that I'm fully fine with the planning commission considering what the parameters around employment should be. I think that's fine. I think we've covered two in the conversation we just had. And then the two questions I think we added were, the one that you just mentioned was, just to basically revisit whether short-term rentals make sense in this construct as it adapts to what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think that the definition was way too broad of more than two occupants per bedroom, right? Because that, I don't know, that seems.
I don't
And
know.
events.
What's that?
I was thinking that also, like the other, sorry, I was abrupt. But if it was also the two occupancy, but also the other ruling, I was thinking of the loophole where they would be in violation is if they were holding big parties like a big event.
No, this wasn't violation. This is like, oh, you only need this if you're having
Oh, I see.
3
I
or
see.
more per bedroom. So if
I
it's a
get it.
3-bedroom house, you have to have
2, 4,
9.
6.
But what if it's 8 people? You know, it's still a short-term rental, and we want
I
to
get it.
have the ability to revoke those if there are bad actors, if per your example.
Got it.
So I think the question is, should there be a reevaluation of the definition of what is a short-term rental?
I think that's guidance. Is that guidance enough? Or do you want
There
councils?
currently is no specific regulation. The policy I stated is just the direction we took at one point from city council to, as you said, issue a business license and have the ability to revoke on those that are violating code. The enforcement on it currently is primarily noise. So where there are noise complaints, we can seek remedy through that. But there are no other standards such as 2 people per bedroom or anything of that nature.
You're not going into houses and checking how many are in bedroom?
No, no.
Creepy.
So I don't know if you have a more specific question that you want to pose to the the Planning Commission about short-term rentals.
Could you do the maximum number? I guess it's the same
No,
problem.
I think from what I read, it says you don't even need an HOP if you're going to have less than 2 people per bed, or if you're going to have 2 people or less per bedroom.
Where is that?
So, I'm sorry, Councilmember Garcia, that example on the slide was a way to demonstrate what could constitute an event that is greater than the
Oh, I get it.
pedestrian or vehicular traffic.
An event. Okay. Yes, that is on the small event slide. I see that. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. I'm okay with. I thought that was the definition of a short-term rental. No, that's the definition of a small event at a short-term rental.
Just an example.
Gotcha.
And I guess the other question I gleaned from our conversation is that, do we need to consider changes to the application? That might not even be a planning commission question. It might just be a question for staff to think about ways to streamline or you know, clarify the application, the HOC application.
Yes.
And potentially,
HOP, rather.
potentially renewal. Or do we? I don't know. 'Cause
Renewal of what?
Of the HOP. Because it's annual renewal and it's just you pay the fee and you get it, right? There's no questions asked, but maybe that's fine.
The vehicle of renewal is through the renewal of a business license. There's no restatement of conditions or findings or anything of that nature for the permit. The permit is once and done unless the business license lapses and there's suspension for whatever reason.
So what happens when somebody comes for a business license and a home occupancy permit, and then within the scope of time, they have now changed what their business is, even though it's the same business, same fictitious business name and or LLP or whatever it might be, and now their business is different than it was when they first applied. I don't know that we have any vehicle to even catch that or to speak to that.
So the nature of the business would not be the same as permitted, so they would need to come in for a new home occupation permit.
Okay. So that would.
And their failure to do that would give us the right to revoke their business license.
Right, seek remedy.
Okay.
Okay. Do you, think carefully, do you want anything else from us?
I think I have a lot of good direction.
All right.
Good.
Yeah, I'm glad you said good. Okay, do we need a break, or should we?
I think the next two
Let's
items
move
are
on.
short.
Yeah, they are short. Okay, so going back to the first discussion, and I appreciate those of you who have stayed around for that, which was consideration of resolution 2423 establishing a fee waiver program for temporary use permit applications. Do we have a report for that?
Yes, we have City Attorney Alex Garagosian.
Thank you.
Council, I don't have a presentation up on the screen, just an oral presentation for you and the staff report that I had submitted. So currently we do not issue fee waivers ad hoc. A concern is that there might be claims of favoritism or bias. Also, there might be claims of a gift of public funds. So we adopt policies. We need to adopt a policy if we're going to have any kind of fee waiver. Now, in my research, based on this city's practice, the only time we waive or reduce fees are for special events permits. And interestingly, those fees are reduced or waived not by staff and not by the council, but by the Community Services Commission. So there's a couple of policy considerations here. We drafted an ordinance, and I won't go through all the details of the ordinance, but just a couple of policy considerations and points to raise that are worth thinking about. First, this resolution only applies to temporary use permits. It doesn't apply to any other type of permit issued by the city. So if this were to be adopted, then we have special events permits and TUPs potentially that could have waived fees or reduced fees. Second, this resolution does not establish a tiered system of fee waivers or reductions. Instead, it leaves the decision to the city manager or the city manager's designee. So they can waive all of it, they can waive a percentage of it. Some cities, like I took this, I modeled this resolution off of what the city of La Cañada had and based off of what our municipal code says with respect to special events permits. And La Cañada has a tiered system. They say waive 50% if they meet these requirements, waive 25% if they meet these requirements. We don't have that. It's at the city manager's discretion. Third, some cities allow fee waivers when organizations seek city co-sponsorship or partnership. This resolution does not contemplate that option, and frankly that option is more appropriate in the special events permit context because special events permits happen on publicly owned property, whereas TUPs are issued for privately owned property, or institutional or commercial, basically not public property. The resolution does not authorize the Planning Commission to waive TUP application fees, unlike the way it's done for special events permits. Special events permits go to the Community Services Commission. Here, the Planning Commission wouldn't be weighing in on the TUP, it would be the city manager. The reason for the way we drafted this is because usually TUPs often have a short turnaround time, and if we have to agendize that for the Planning Commission, that might be difficult to get it on the agenda in time for their event. Lastly, some cities create both a fee waiver and grant program. Really, they're two sides of the same coin. It's the city subsidizing a private activity. This resolution, however, is just limited to fee waivers. If the council wanted to expand the scope to include, a grant program, we can revisit that at a separate time. And that concludes my presentation.
Okay, do we have any questions?
So we're solely limiting to TUP.
Yes. Just a quick one.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know who this is for, but I don't have the fee schedule in front of me. There's the TUP application fee, and do we have I remember we talked about notification fees. Is that separate? And can that be contemplated? Because I think the notification fee might be sometimes more expensive or be burdensome. So are we contemplating just the application fee or the application fee and the notification fee?
I think it'd be both, yeah.
Okay.
Anybody else? I just have a question. The exclusions that you included in section 7 of the resolution, I suspect might, and again, I hesitate because we're talking about specific things that, that generated the request to talk about this type of fee waiver program. I'm not sure that this would actually allow for the activities that we're thinking about. A lot of these events are not actually open to the public at large, right? At least without paying for a ticket or something else. So we might just need to. Are these responsive? I guess the question that I'm saying is this responsive to what we've been asked, or is this just sort of modeled from other ordinances?
Modeled from other ordinances.
Okay, so so this is the scope of those can be part of our discussion tonight?
Yes.
Okay.
And so going to your section 7, like 7A, like what does that definition mean? Because I'm thinking specifically about an event that's going to occur, and that is the Sierra Madre Elementary School annual fund, but the annual fund is a subset of the Pasadena Educational Fund, right?
Which is
So
not in
the
Sierra
PEF is the organization, really, but the sub-organization is a Sierra Madre-based organization, but that's not the true organization.
Right, and I think, you know, provisions like this probably are up for interpretation. The way I would interpret it is if the organization is registered with the California Secretary of State outside of the city, and they don't have some kind of chapter or office or some kind of physical connection to the city, I would consider it an entity based outside the city of Sierra Madre. So if that's not what the city council, if that's not the interpretation the city council wants, I recommend amending this or striking it.
Any other questions? Okay. I will open this up to public comment.
Madam Mayor, the city clerk's office did not receive any emails. However, there is one speaker card submitted by Miles Prince.
Hi there.
Hi. I know I'm usually here in a different capacity from the water district, but you guys have had too much fun tonight for a water supply briefing. So that'll have to wait. I'm here tonight because this year I'm also the co-chair of the Sierra Madre Community Foundation. I'm also the auction co-chair and host of the Sierra Madre Elementary Annual Funds annual auction. Those two events being a week apart, which has done wonders for my billables at the office this past month. In that process of both groups preparing for these two events in a few weeks, we both fell into this unintended consequence of a trap set by the changes that went into effect recently on the TUP, specifically as to those fees. Both the noticing fee, which is substantial at $419, as well as the application fee of $50. And it sounds, you know, like we're just complaining about a few $100, but it's a big deal. I mean, for example, the Community Foundation a few weeks ago, we approved a grant to fund this year's library bookmark contest. The entire grant was $300. So we funded this year's bookmark contest, and then simultaneously turned around and paid 150% of that to the city to fundraise to provide those types of grants. Likewise, with the annual fund, $470 pays for more than a week of one of the noon play yard aids that we directly fund that the district PUSD won't fund. So it is real money, and it is of real consequence. You know, I do think there are some revisions that need to be made to the proposed resolution, specifically already caught onto the issue of these events are open to the public, anyone can come, but obviously you have to buy a ticket. Yes, also, the annual fund is a special project agreement through the Pasadena Education Foundation, which is a 501c3. I think these are all things that can be fixed. However, the one big change that also concerned me in the resolution was this sort of arbitrary cap of $500 per year that could be waived per group. First of all, it has to be relative to the fees being charged, and when it costs $470 to get a TUP, that means one event a year. And a lot of groups will have an annual fall event, an annual spring event. And all of these conversations you guys are having over the last few months really come down to the fact that there aren't a lot of commercial venues that can handle 200-300 people in Sierra Madre. And so you have to rely on people stupid enough like me to let 200 people into your backyard. And so if your group has 2-3 annual events, it is very likely that all 2 or 3 or all of those events will require TUPs. And if you can only get one of those fees waived, we just have now another unintended consequence. So I think the resolution is correct in what it's trying to do, but I hope those revisions will be made for the specific needs we've already found into. And that's time.
Great, thank you so much.
At this time, we don't have any other speaker cards submitted. Okay, I will bring this back for discussion.
Was, I guess one question, was the city manager or, you know, in the discussions within staff, was there a desire to create some objectivity here and not allow everything to be fully discretionary? Because one of the things I thought about with the exclusions was, could these be not phrased as, you know, blanket ineligibility criteria, but could it be more like, these are the kinds of things that will be considered in granting the application and deciding, you know, what percentage of the fee would be waived, right? Like these are sort of like things that will be, you know, that the criteria versus hard and fast ineligibility.
Right, yeah, you can certainly convert it into that. So it's not unbridled discretion. There are criteria in Section 5 that must be considered when issuing this permit, but certainly we can incorporate the 7 sections exclusions into Section 5's criteria determinations, or Section 5's criteria evaluation. So they're not elements of a test, but they're factors to be considered.
I mean, to me personally, I think the only one under exclusions that I think should be a hard and fast rule would be for-profit. But others should weigh in as to their thoughts.
So I think a lot of this kind of goes back to the public commenter, and I generally always agree with Director Prince, especially when it comes to water. But we didn't want the other unintended consequence of waiving or a lot of fees, and then having people come into our city and say we're for the city and we're going to have, you know, 10 parties a year, and that's kind of going back to the issue that we were just dealing with, right? So I was a fan of only having one per organization, or maybe one per site, or things of that nature. But if we have some of these exclusions in place, that would potentially curb some of the unintended consequences of people saying, oh, we can go into Sierra Madre and have all kinds of events and not have to pay fees. If we can get rid of that, then I'm okay with having more than one time per year. But I think they kind of go hand in hand. If the exclusions are exclusionary enough and really truly benefit the people of Sierra Madre, a couple fee waivers, I'm okay with a few fee waivers for if it's so fine-tuned that we can keep that unintended consequence out, if that makes sense.
So I guess you're looking at for-profit and no public benefit, E, as hard and fast exclusion.
And it's hard. How do you public benefit? Well, there's all kinds of public benefit that would be outside the Sierra Madre as well, right? So, because there's lots of good causes that aren't
Okay, I guess, yeah, so
that aren't Sierra Madre specific, that we probably want to give them a fee waiver because it's for childhood cancer or whatever it might be, right? Not specific to Sierra Madre, but we don't want that happening every week in our city either, right?
Wouldn't that be covered by a TUP? Not being allowed for that property that often? Not just the amount, the fee waiver, that you wouldn't be able to get the TUP.
You can skip from property. There are some properties where you can do this. I mean, I could see it happening.
It's not the TUP is property specific, where this is entity specific.
Yeah.
But I mean,
I'm also looking at so basically whenever we campaign, that means if you want to have a meet and greet, you need to pay the fee and the notice. And also if it's a religious, like burning of the greens that happens at, for Ascension Church, happens at a person's home, where they burn the parts of the Christmas tree, that means they need to they can't have that waived for their event. Because it says exclusions as activities of a political or religious nature.
Yeah, I was recommending not having specific exclusions like that, because
Okay.
again, sort of, I don't want to be a broken record, but sort of, you know, leaning heavy on the discretion. Because there's nothing that says we have, like, if you do X, Y, or Z, you're entitled to a fee waiver. They're always discretionary.
So you're saying to get rid of all of Section 7?
Well, I mean, I was saying that perhaps we keep, I would personally think the only one would be for-profit, but then Councilmember Garcia pointed out that maybe it needs to also then, to the extent that it provides no public benefit to the city or its residents. Although.
His point was childhood cancer. Are we saying that you couldn't have a fundraiser for childhood cancer in your home?
For free. I mean, that's, yeah.
Well, it's still not for profit, it's going towards a 501(c).
And I should clarify, the no public benefit, it comes from that constitutional provision prohibiting gift of public funds, so it contemplates a public benefit for Sierra Madre residents. So there's, in this case, it'd be activities that provide no public benefit for Sierra Madre residents.
Okay, that's implied.
Yeah, and we can clarify it.
Okay.
Well, and you can still make an argument that curing
Is a
childhood
public
cancer
benefit.
benefits residents of Sierra Madre
Yeah,
to the
right.
extent that it
Right.
benefits anybody. I mean,
Yeah.
So are we limiting it down then to for-profit and no public benefit? So just B and E, the first E?
that would be my recommendation, and moving the other, oh, there's also two E's, Alex. The other 6 or whatever the number is, to being criteria in which, to the extent that it's not already covered by the criteria in 5, including those as criteria by which the city manager or his designee would consider.
Yeah.
So 7 would be, don't even bother, and then, but 6 is like the discretionary part, right?
Or it's actually 5, and then we can come back to the cap.
Right.
Section 6 is the cap.
Which then so just in prior history, the way the city has done a lot of its benefits has been through like groups like the Sierra Madre Community Foundation that does these entities for other groups. So could that then be changed for so Sierra Madre Community Foundation is holding the event, but it's not benefiting the same group. Couldn't that count? Because otherwise they can't only do one event and that's it. We can't help you fundraise this year.
They can do another event, but just have to pay the fee.
But that's what I'm saying. It's benefiting a different group. It's not always benefiting the same group. They do events for lots of different groups in Sierra Madre.
I think they mostly do events for
themselves.
themselves, and then
Okay,
they give
I'm sorry,
the
but
money
that's
to
what I
other
mean.
people.
That's what I mean. So to me, that defeats the whole purpose of having the Sierra Madre Community Foundation as its own 501(c) that helps these other groups. To me, and it makes them like their own entity. It's not like the Cancer Foundation that's going to do one gala, or
The other groups, so the other groups can have a party on their own. It doesn't have to be the community foundation.
so they just pull the permit, or they just pull the fee waiver then, and the community
yeah.
foundation doesn't put their name on it.
Correct.
Even though they're going to be holding the money for it and doing the fundraising for it.
Yeah, that's fine.
No, that's not, because that's what we just got in some trouble with the 4th of July committee. You can't do that, you can't move the money that way.
Also, council, I'll point out the fee cap here is a cap on the city manager's authority,
Okay,
right? But someone can always come to the city council under this resolution and say, I'd like a fee waiver, but they would need to agendize it in time. That's the thing. So it couldn't be a short turnaround.
yeah.
I'm thinking, though, that to the point about how we have a set dollar amount in this, but the fees might change, that I'm wondering the way we express the authority cap on the city manager's discretion not be a hard dollar, but be somehow a percentage of the then fee, right? Because if over time the fees go up, $500 might be less than 1.
And what was Lacaniatas, do you remember?
I don't.
You see what I'm saying? Like, otherwise we're gonna have to come back and amend this as we amend the fee schedule.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fine if we make it clear, because I don't think it's clear from the reading that this is just a cap on the city manager's discretion, not a cap on the ability to give fee waivers.
Because it says city manager shall not issue, or has the discretion to.
Right, and I don't think we've provided in this a way for this to be waived other than by the city manager, right?
Right. The city manager also, just to point out, it contemplates a first come, first served basis. So there's gonna be a pool of funds budgeted for this purpose. And then once those funds are exhausted, that's it. No more fee waivers.
By the city manager.
Once, right, when the city manager issues once he waives these fees, he's gonna waive them up to a certain amount because it's coming out of the general fund essentially, or where someone's gotta.
And then they would
difference.
then he or the organization would need to come to council for things above that amount.
Right.
I think if we make that clear, that probably addresses your concern about unlimited amounts being spent, right? Because there would be a backstop. Because I'll have to admit, I'm sympathetic to one organization having multiple events and not wanting to eat into their proceeds in either case. And the notice fee is the notice of provisions of the TUP are being separately considered, right? And is this type of situation part of that discussion?
Yes, 'cause it says TUPs and associated fees.
No, I guess what I'm saying is I know that the TUP ordinance is also currently under discussion by the
Right.
Planning Commission, and changes with respect to the triggers for requiring notice are under consideration.
Right.
So I guess what I'm saying is that, to me, part of that discussion needs to be what types of organizations and types of events require notification to get to the point of like, why are we imposing this expense on these types of events?
Right.
Okay.
So you're saying it for the TUP, consideration of the TUP ordinance.
Right. Does that make sense? Because I know that's separately under, like we might have overstepped our notice requirements. I guess is what we've talked about in our last meeting.
So I would confirm that, or concur with the city attorney. The planning commission will be considering changes to what would trigger the requirement for noticing.
And that's gonna be on the 18th?
I'm sorry.
That's part of the 18th, that's the meeting that's scheduled for the 18th?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. City Attorney kind of created another question in my mind. Now I lost it. What was your previous comment?
About exhausting the funds in the budget?
Yes. So, because I would like to, if we approve something, I'd like to approve it retroactively to the beginning of the fiscal year. But if there's no current budget or budget amendment that would include those types of items, that's a moot point anyway, right?
Right.
I don't think we have the finance director here as to what
We can do.
if there's an additional opportunity for a budget amendment.
Assistant City Manager, do you know?
We just had the mid-year budget review.
I know.
Do we do an end of? I guess we could. I mean, there's no reason why we couldn't.
Do the end of the fiscal year
And-
budget amendment?
And there may be funds that the city manager can tap into today, and this apply prospectively as of when it's adopted, or when it takes effect. If it takes effect, let's say, in the next fiscal year, then we can properly budget for it. But then in the meantime, the city manager can tap into whatever funds he feels are appropriate.
Or we could make sure that the amount budgeted in the next fiscal year can be used to retroactively reimburse for prior
Permit
I don't know if we can straddle fiscal years. We don't have the right people, I think, here to have this discussion.
Yeah, but I think that's something to consider. It's my understanding these organizations have already paid the fees.
We do utilize contingency funds for these types of purposes that are not expected. We'd have to see what amount we have in our contingency funds thus far, and that could be a possibility to use.
Okay. So I think we're gonna need to bring this back, right, with the revisions to the resolution, or do you want us to pass it with the types of revisions that we're directing?
If you wouldn't mind, Mayor, noting again what the proposed amendments here are.
Okay, so I think it would be moving the exclusions other than for-profit and no public benefit for City of Sierra Madre to criteria, sort of they may not be cut and paste, they may need a little, and some of them might be covered kind of by the broader criteria anyway. And then making clear in 6 that this is a limit on the city manager's authority, not a limit on what fees can be waived, right? To the extent that the city manager's authority is exceeded, then that would be a decision for the city council. Is there anything else?
Did you want to keep it at 500?
Oh, I think, yeah, the other thing was to tie it more to like maybe a percentage, like of maybe it's no more than 150% or 200% of the then applicable fee or something.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any idea how many fee waivers are potentially we're talking about here?
I don't know how many TUPs, if we have a sense of how many have been applied for and that would qualify.
Because more people will apply if they know now that they're available that maybe didn't apply in the past.
Which is not bad, right? Because I would prefer people not having non-permitted events to avoid paying the fee.
Right, I'm just talking from a budgetary point of view. I mean, we need to have some idea how much money we're spending here.
I'm not certain 100%, but I believe there were 4 and within the past few months filed by nonprofit organizations. But that was kind of an anomalous. We don't normally receive applications by nonprofit organizations. It just suddenly has come up in recent time.
I mean, Gina, are you concerned that more people will have events in Sierra Madre if we're not charging them $500?
No, what I'm saying is that we're losing the $500, and if a lot of people find out about this who are not applying for these waivers and they start applying for them, then we're going to have a hole in our budget.
And it's a hard cost for noticing fees.
Well, right, the noticing part is a hard cost, but that, again, may be addressed separately. We may not require a notice for some of this stuff as part of the TUP.
So I think maybe going over 1 is probably a little more than we can, until we know otherwise. Depends. We have the right to prioritize anything. So if you guys want to make this a priority, I'll go along with you. We could spend the money, maybe go up to a percentage with a cap, maybe up to $1,000 or something like that. But
yeah, I would be fine saying 200% of the then current fee, because that also allows if and when the fee situation on the TUP side is
the current fee, yeah.
Is because that way, if it turns out that these types of events aren't requiring notice fees, then that 200% becomes 200% of 50.
Mm-hmm.
Which, by the way, 50% is what we think staff time roughly. That's part of our fee schedule, right? So we think this is a $50 staff cost. So this is not a huge burden on the city, I don't think, from a cost perspective, without the noticing. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me.
So 200% of the.
And that's what we're putting in the approval cap.
For the cap, yeah. And we can always consider other instances, Gene, to someone says, oh, I can't, I need to have a third event and I wouldn't have the fee waived, then we can just consider it as council.
Right. Sure. I'm sure there would be instances where we would approve that.
And if you're gonna have 3 events, you're gonna have to plan somewhat, you're not gonna have 3 between councils, right?
Right.
That's a small event, isn't it?
And do we feel a 12-month period is clear rather than in a fiscal year for a budgetary year, or like is it a rolling 12-month period, or?
We would treat it as a rolling 12-month period, but if you want to tie it to the fiscal year, we certainly can.
I mean, but if the point is for budgetary purposes, then maybe it should be a budgetary year. Yeah, that makes more sense to me. That way we have some certainty around the budget.
And again, can you remind me, is it listed as per venue, or is it say per venue, or does it only say per entity?
It's per entity.
Okay. Single entity, yes.
Yeah, I think entity is the way we want to go.
That's good.
Okay, does that make sense?
Yes, so we can bring it back at this next city council meeting. Is that the direction?
Right, and then maybe in the interim, we can get clarity on this retroactive
Effective date,
situation,
right.
like whether we can make it retroactive and have some room in this year's budget to do so, or,
So potentially come back with a budget amendment.
Right.
Yeah.
Or the
Or,
contingency
or
funds.
if there's funds, I mean, we're not talking like huge dollars here, so maybe there's enough money in the contingency fund for. Okay. All right, are we good?
Yes.
Good, okay. All right, so now I'm moving on to the last discussion item, what has become the last discussion item, consideration of resolution 24-22, establishing a Sierra Madre Public Safety Reward Program. I believe our police chief is going to provide that staff report.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Temp and City Council. So what we're contemplating is having a rewards program where if we have a crime, mostly a violent crime. Recently we had a hit and run traffic collision where we had one of our pedestrians severely injured as a result of a bicyclist. And what this program would provide is a reward where the city manager would have the authority to approve up to $5,000 for a reward leading to the identification, prosecution of a subject involved in a criminal matter in the city.
And conviction, correct?
Correct, and conviction.
So to just add to that, there are under state law, there's 2 reasons why we can adopt such an ordinance. It's expressly authorized. As our chief said, the first one is for information leading to the determination of the identity of, apprehension of any person whose willful misconduct results in injury or death to any person or willfully damages or destroys any property. That's the first one. And the second one is a person who comes to the aid of any peace officer of the local agency or who furnishes information leading to the arrest and conviction of any person or persons killing or assaulting with a deadly weapon or inflicting serious bodily harm upon a peace officer of a local agency. We have procedures to for the offer of the reward and for payment of the reward here in the resolution. And in order to avoid fraud and a misappropriation of funds, we also have, again, basically a list of exclusions, people who are prohibited from receiving this payment.
So the second example you gave was in aiding, so there was multiple parts to that second example, or second category. Is a reward allowed for helping an officer that leads to an arrest? So it's you came to the aid, you stopped someone, and it's up to the discretion of the police department to say, thank you for your help. I'm going to give you a Good Samaritan payment, essentially, a Good Samaritan of reward.
So I'll just read it. It says, to any person who comes to the aid of any peace officer of the local agency or who furnishes information leading to the arrest and conviction of any person or persons killing or assaulting. So those are 2 separate concepts. So the aid wouldn't necessarily need to result in a arrest or conviction.
Any type of aid you could give to a police officer, it could be considered as part of the reward.
Part of a reward, correct.
Got it.
Could you finish that last sentence? I think it was specific to an officer, though.
Yes.
Yes.
To a peace officer.
Yeah, nothing, it has to be like harm to a police officer, that second provision. Not just harm to a person, right? The first provision allows for that. Second one is specific to a police officer.
Yeah, both prongs
Right.
of the second one are specific to police officers.
Correct.
Or,
Correct.
While acting in the line of duty.
yeah,
Right.
peace officer. Is there any reason why here we didn't have a similar, both a per incident cap on the authority of the city manager as well as a budget amount, or is it because we don't contemplate actually budgeting any specific amount for this?
There is a per incident cap for
Right.
the city manager. There is 5,000, but we don't have a budget for this one, and it's completely up to the city council. The policy rationale behind it, in my mind at least, was to what Councilmember Goss was saying. People might be drawn to applying for TUPs if they recognize they might apply for these TUP fee waivers if they realize that they're available, and then that might exceed what the expectation is, so maybe it makes sense to have a budget. But for rewards, no one's really applying, no one's doing these things because they're seeking a reward. They just happen to be eligible for a reward, and we're encouraging them to come forward.
Well, they might be, but they have to actually like lead to a conviction.
Well, they'd have to pay attention to us.
Yeah, that's what I.
Find out that this exists.
Right, that's what I mean, and also like they may be thinking I will do this solely to get the reward, but it actually has to be successful, right? I mean, there's a lot pretty objective criteria as to when you're actually eligible to get the reward.
Right, and again, we state when a reward is available, as opposed to an applicant coming and applying for a waiver.
Right.
The process is a little different.
Right, so we will basically check the budgetary implication before
Beforehand.
offering it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions? Because I need to open it for public comment. Okay, public comment on this discussion item.
Madam Mayor, there are no speaker cards submitted.
Okay, great. So now, discussion? Or a motion?
I love it.
I do too. I think it's very similar to other cities, what they do to support.
I move to adopt resolution 2422.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion counts as
Yay.
third. All right, any items for future meetings? Seeing
no.
none? Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
No.
I didn't give a long,
Move
okay.
To adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned.